Can you believe it's been over a year since my last production-ready project tutorial? Things were very different when I filmed the Sharp tutorial. Server components were brand new, Bun hadn't hit 1.0 yet, Primogen still had a job, hell, I barely even had a mustache. Before we start, I want to go over the tech that we chose, the companies that are sponsoring this video, and how I recommend actually using this tutorial. If you want to skip straight to code, you can use the chapter markers below to do that. This tutorial is not designed for brand new devs. I would not recommend watching this if you're learning how to code still. If you've built a few projects before and you already have a GitHub, you are probably good to go, but this isn't meant to be for everyone, and there's lots of good tutorials for beginners already. I know there's a lot of devs who use these tutorials to learn new technologies, and I think this is great for that, regardless of your experience level. The goal is to showcase how I build production apps. Everything I do in this tutorial is based on real choices I've made when shipping real applications, be it at Twitch or on my own. So what technologies are we using? What the hell even is the T3 stack? Honestly, T3 stack's more of a mindset than a concrete stack. When I started using Next, I loved it, despite realizing that it was kind of incomplete. That was by design though. Next is best when you use it with other technologies, so I hunted for the best ones and I coined it after my username. The first ever video on my channel was actually me playing with the stack. Well, there's a skate video, but ignore that. Nexel, a young community member, took the opportunity to make a CLI that scaffolded a new project with all the things that I was recommending, and it took off alarmingly quick. Since then, the technology we recommend has changed a lot. Next moved to server components. Prism's been overtaken by Drizzle. TRPC's become much more optional, and I stopped rolling my own auth. This is by design though. The T3 stack was always meant to be modular, chasing the best set of tools to empower modern full stack devs and letting you swap them out whenever you want. That's why I'm making this tutorial though. It's time to embrace the new tools that I've swapped to and recommend. This doesn't mean the old recommendations are bad though. I still use PageRouter in Next, and I still use Prisma as well for a handful of projects. I just prefer these new solutions now, and in my opinion, they're stable enough to ship confidently. Here's the core tech that we're going to be using. Next.js alongside React, and of course we'll be using server components and server actions. Really excited for that. TypeScript, because obviously we're the type safe cult. Tailwind, because of course Tailwind, it makes CSS way easier. Shadcn UI, because it's the best way to handle styles in a new application. Drizzle ORM, because I'm kind of tired of Prisma and Drizzle's gotten to an incredible spot. As well as PNPM, because as much as I love Bun, it was not fully compatible with some of the Drizzle stuff yet, mostly probably on the Drizzle side. Regardless, I don't want to dig into it. I just want this to work for you, so we'll be using PNPM for this tutorial. You can use whatever you want though, to be clear. You just might run into some weird issues here and there. The tech list is cool, but we need to host this all somewhere. And I'm excited to share that all of the hosting solutions I use were down to sponsor this video. Well, except for GitHub. Regardless, here are all the sponsors that made this possible. First and foremost, we have Vercel, who makes deploying web apps at scale as simple as pressing 2 buttons. Clerk, making auth so easy and maintainable that I use it in every project I build now. Posthog, which has been my analytics tool of choice for quite a bit, and I'm really lucky that I convinced them to let me be their first sponsored creator. And Upstash, which is the fastest KV store on the web. And a brand new sponsor today is Sentry. Really excited to have them on too, because they're the industry standard for error management in production, and now I can show you guys what I mean when I say that. Note that PlanetScale is not in this list. While I still love them and I ship their databases in production every day, I think it's important that these tutorials are free for anyone to follow along with. We'll be using the Vercel Postgres database instead. I want to emphasize that I do actually use all of these things in production. Nobody paid their way to be first in line. I could make much more money if I was to just pick whatever solutions would pay me, but instead I reached out to the ones that I'm actually using. I'm incredibly lucky that most of them were down to help with the cost of making this content. Anyways, enough blabbing. Let's go write some code. As you could probably have guessed, we'll be starting with create T3 app. I'll be using PNPM. You can use NPM or Yarn. I'm not 100% confident with Bun for this project just because Drizzle Studio doesn't quite work how you need it to yet. It might even be fixed by the time this video is up, but I'm using PNPM. I recommend it if you haven't already. Just follow along with that if you can. With that all said, let's get started. PNPM create T3 app at latest. Just guarantees you get the latest version of the package, which you probably want for this. Now that we're creating, let's select our options. We want to name this T3 Gallery. You can name it whatever you want, of course. This is just the name I'm picking for the project. TypeScript, duh, you wouldn't be here otherwise. Tailwind, yep. TRPC, here's where the first controversial choice of this tutorial comes up. I don't think TRPC is going to help us with the things that I'm trying to teach and communicate here. It does make a lot of sense to use TRPC still, even in App Router, Next.js, server component projects, but it's not a necessary dependency for full stack apps the way I would have considered it when building with Next before. We'll go over what I mean by that and also where TRPC is still very valuable near the end of the tutorial. I also am really excited for a new version of TRPC coming soon that takes more advantage of server actions as well as server component design. So For now, no onto your PC, as much as it hurts me to say such. Same deal with auth. At this point in time, we're still not offering Clerk as an option in Create T3 app. That might change in the future, but honestly, the setup is so simple, it's not a big deal, and I'll be sure to set up auth with y'all as we keep going. So none for that for now. Another controversial choice. As much as I've loved and recommended Prisma, I do think Drizzle is at a point where it's hard to justify Prisma anymore. The quality of the experience Drizzle offers, the performance bump, the better integration with TypeScript directly, and the more minimal approach to their design has been a lifesaver, and I'm really, really impressed with Drizzle. So I think they're an obvious choice here. And now the whole point, the thing that made me have to do this tutorial in the first place, App Router. Last controversial decision here. As much as I do still love PlanetScale, I recognize they are not the right choice for something like this, and I've come to a mutual agreement with PlanetScale to let me use other databases when doing tutorials like this in order to make sure everyone can follow along without having to pay a cent, which is, again, very important to us. You should absolutely be able to do this whole tutorial for free. So with that all said, we can't pick PlanetScale. We're going with Postgres, specifically Vercel Postgres, which isn't particularly hard to set up, but I'll show you how to do it in just a bit. Should we initialize the Git repo and stage the changes? Yep. Should we run npm install? Sure. Default alias is fine. Here we go. T3 gallery scaffolded successfully. And now it's initialized, it's time to open it up in your IDE. I'll be using VS Code, but you can use whatever you like. Here we have our code base. We have all of the things that got initialized as we started the project. I usually like to commit this in its exact state when we start, so we can do that now. Git commit init. Cool. And now we have our starting point. We can also run this quick. Now that we have this running, we can actually check it out in the browser. I'm going to be using Arc. It doesn't matter at all. You can just use Chrome. In fact, Arc is effectively Chrome for this use case, but yeah, I've been liking Arc, so I'll be using it. And here we have the Create T3 app homepage. So now that we know this is running, there are two things I want to do first and foremost. I think these are really important starting points that make projects like this much more likely to succeed. I also don't see them included in tutorials enough. First thing I want to do is make a to-do list, so we actually have a rough idea of what we want to build. It's so easy to get rabbit holed on specific things that aren't that important, and if we don't have a list of the specific stuff we want to complete, we're never going to complete the project. This also will help me making the tutorial, but this is a thing I do in every project I spin up whenever I'm working on something like this. So let's hop back to our IDE, because I'm not putting this to-do list in some crazy random app that I'll never remember. I'm putting it straight in the README. So we're going to delete all those contents. We're going to put in T3 gallery. I'll make a separate to-do section. All caps is fine for this. And now we're going to add all the to-dos. First, we want to get it deploying. Make it deploy. Then we want to scaffold basic UI with mock data. Then we want to actually set up a database. Then we want to attach database to UI. Then probably a good point to do auth at that point. Oh, look at that. My Super Maven autocomplete. This is so smart. These are all things I wanted to do. The rest, not so much so, but image upload is an important one, and notably doing that after authentication. Then I would say after we get all of that working, routing and image page is important. So when you actually click an image, it has its own separate route. We'll be using the parallel route stuff that's in the new app router, and it's hard to get your head around, but it's really powerful once you do. So I'm actually very much excited for this part. I'm not going to think of everything here. I know I want to add a delete button with server actions. That'll be a really fun addition. Analytics are really important. Rate limiting, I'm actually really excited to do. And rate limiting will, of course, be using our friends over at Upstash, because they built the simplest and best rate limiter in the world. Should also point out analytics will be Posthog. And honestly, I'm going to recommend setting up error management slightly earlier, just so that we can get errors when things go wrong with like image uploading. So I'll put error management right after image upload. And autocomplete smart enough to know that Sentry is the industry standard for a reason. I'm very excited to be working with them for this video. Thank you again to all of our sponsors for making this all possible. I'll add those withs for the other sponsors too. Obviously, we're going to be using Clerk for authentication. The actual database, as much as I love Supabase, and I'm not surprised that got auto-completed, we'll be using Vercel Postgres just so it's one less thing to set up and one less decision to make. And obviously, Vercel will be used for deployments. Cool. This is a pretty rough idea of what we want to do. I'll likely come back here and add additional things as we realize stuff that we're missing, but we'll handle that all as we get there. So I also want to make sure we're actually seeing our app when it deploys. So I'm going to just go to the default page, kill most of the content here, and say, hello, gallery in progress. Cool. Quickly check, hello, gallery in progress. Cool. Now we know this is definitely our app if we get this working. Git status to make sure we see all the changes here. Something I'll be doing a lot in this tutorial is git add-p instead of git add-a. It seems like a small thing, but the magic of -p is you're effectively doing mini code reviews for all of your changes. So I can see here that I deleted the old README and I made the change of this new README. So I'll do Y to say that I've completed that. And then here I deleted all that content and then I added this hello text. So Y to accept that as well. Now I have all of those changes staged. I can commit those changes as a starting point and README. Now I want to push, but it's not going to go anywhere. I could go initialize this on GitHub, but I'm lazy. As much as I love to crap on the GitHub CLI because its UX isn't great, as you'll see here, it's a game of 21 questions. Still slightly better than dealing with the GitHub UI. GitHub repo create is the command we want to run. And here it selects the worst possible default option of create a new repo on GitHub from scratch. We want to push the existing one, so make sure you arrow down and hit that. Path is the same. T3 gallery is a fine name. I want this in t3.gg. No description. Private for now because I don't want to share this code base till we're done. Add a remote. Obviously, that's the point. Origin, duh, it's a new project. Origin, yes. Push, cool. Way too many questions. Everything there was either a bad default or an obvious default, or both, but last time I complained about this, people were mad at me, so ignore that. Now we have this pushed. If I go to my GitHub, you will see in the repositories tab that I have T3 gallery here, which is JavaScript because we haven't written enough TypeScript in it yet for that to be flagged over. But at this point in time, funny enough, it's half and half. There's a reason for the JS files. I'll talk about that in a bit. I made a mistake and used a similar project name and had a conflict. So ignore this check. You won't see that yet, but you do want to see this check even if you don't have it yet, because what this check represents is this project being linked to Vercel. It's actually very easy to do such. You go to Vercel.com, you sign in with your GitHub if you haven't already signed in. You click the little add new button that my face is covering. I'll do that so you can see it. Project. Import Git repos, T3 gallery. All looks good. One important piece here is there's environment variables that will be missing. This shouldn't block build, but with create T3 app, we've set things up so it will. And you'll see when we deploy, this is actually going to fail. And I expect it to do such, and I'll explain why in a second. And after just a few seconds, we almost immediately get this failure. Invalid environment variable, database URL required. This is because one of the packages we have set up for you in create T3 app is an awesome addition by Julius, T3 OSS env. It's the T3 env package. You can learn more about it at env.t3.gg, but the TLDR is we made it so that your environment variables are type safe and consistent in all of your environments. So if you use an environment variable that you haven't predefined here, or you don't define an environment variable that is expected here, you get really good, useful errors in order to make sure that your variables are managed properly in environments. So here we are expecting a database URL. That's why it is placed under server here. So without this included in the project, it's not going to actually build. So let's go over to the project, and now we can add a fake one for now just to make sure it builds and get it online. So we'll hop over to the project. So we have T3 gallery, the new project with no production deployments. Hop into settings, hop into environment variables. And in here, you can paste things, which is really convenient. And I don't just mean like paste individual stuff. I mean, you could grab something like this and copy it, like full on environment file syntax, and it will split on the equals and fill this correctly. So this is just a dummy thing that won't work, but that's fine. We don't need it to work. We just need it to build. And now that we've done that, I'll go over to project. Well, I guess we'll go to deployments because we're going to click here and redeploy, because now that the environment variables have been changed, this build should be able to pass. Request to the Google fonts failed the first time. I'm sure that Google's APIs love how much they're getting hammered by Vercel all the time, but handling it fine. Cool. I have some imports that I'm not using. We can turn off those checks later if we don't feel like doing them in here, which honestly probably shouldn't. But in just a moment, we'll have our app built, and now it's deploying. What did that take? 40, 50 seconds? Just under a minute? Domains being assigned, T3 gallery -olive. So we'll hop over here, and we see now in production, T3 gallery olive.vercel.app. This is our app. And now all we have to do to make updates is git push. And as long as we push to main, this will automatically get deployed. If we make pull requests with changes, we'll get preview builds that show those pull requests and the changes that we've made before we merge. It just, all of these things make the workflow so much better. Setting these up right used to take days to do and would be fragile and break all the time. It's just one of those insane wins that makes working with tools like Vercel groundbreaking in terms of how much more effective you can be as a dev. And this isn't just like, oh, it's easier for hobby projects. This is like, oh, building production software now has a much better overall workflow. So this isn't just for noobs. This is how I ship production grade software. And the rare times I can't use Vercel, I find myself recreating all of this functionality because it is so useful. They didn't pay me to say any of this. This is just how I feel. I'm lucky I convinced them to pay me to do this in the first place. So now that we have that all set up, we can actually start building. Deploy has happened. Let's scaffold some basic UI. One of the things that we want to do here is have that mock data, but in order to have that data, we need images because this is a gallery. So I could go put them on some random file host somewhere or host them locally, but hosting your files out of your public directory has so many potential issues around just bandwidth usage that I want to avoid that to the best of my ability. Best way to do that is use a service that doesn't charge for bandwidth at all. I could think of a pretty cool one, uploadthing.com. If you didn't know, Uploadthing was built by my co-founder, Mark, and me after we built Ping, which is a video calling service, because we realized managing your files in a full stack app was way too hard. We built this to make it comically easy. When I say comically easy, I mean people were speedrunning the setup for Uploadthing and Next, and they had it under 10 seconds. It's hilariously easy. So I'll show you how easy it is to set up something like this. I am already signed in with GitHub. If you're not signed in, just use GitHub. Take seconds. Create a new app. App needs a name. T3 gallery. The US West is the default region. You have a bunch of options now if you want to go somewhere else, but you have to be a paid plan in order to do that, just in case you're not already. The free tier is super, super generous though, so you probably won't need to pay for a tutorial like this. So now we're creating the app. Cool. I could go add the API keys, integrate this in our project and be able to upload files. But honestly, I just need the URLs for this mock data. So I'm going to go to the files page and you'll see there's a nice little upload button here where I can just click, choose, and upload some files that I already have here. So I have some random pictures from some random thumbnails. So I can just grab these, just grab like a few of them. There are 4 random recent thumbnails of mine. They are all now uploaded, which means they all now have URLs. Cool. Now we have all these URLs. I can go put these all in our code somewhere. I'll just do const mock URLs equals URL1, close, URL2, close. And I want to emphasize you don't need to have 4 examples, and I'll also leave this project up so you can use these ones if you want to. But obviously copying these URLs from my screen is not going to be the easiest thing in the world. So I would recommend just spinning up uploadthing and quickly doing this. It's not hard to do and it makes life much easier. And now that we have that done, we have a bunch of default files that we can use. The data is not going to be in this shape. We can reshape it later, but honestly, the core part is that they're all in a URL object. So const mock images equals, cool. The ID is going to be more like the index. So we'll do index +1. This is just us getting mock data so we can actually work on some of the UI. I hate a lot of how this looks by default, so I'm going to kill all of that. I don't even want to give the main styles yet. Let's do a div inside that has class name equals flex. A really fun thing that people don't use enough in Flex is wrap. Wrap means that it won't stop with one row. It will make multiple rows, which in the case of having a lot of images can be really handy. And look at that, my autocomplete being super smart. I almost want to turn it off to make this tutorial a little bit more realistic, but yeah, it just slaughtered that. I don't have a close for this div. That's what it's mad about. Cool. Now that div is closed, and I know I just auto-generated this code, but it's basically exactly what I was going to write. I wanted to put alt text at all for this simple of a demo, but that's fine. Here we have div keys image.id. It needs a key so React knows when to or not to update this thing. And we have the class name, which I wouldn't have done with 1/2 or padding 4 here. I guess I'll change this to with 48, decent starting point. If you want space between the things, gap is magic. So I'll do gap 4 there to put some space between all these images. Theoretically, yeah, that easy. We already have all our images being rendered here with space between. The background color disappeared though. I like background colors. It'd be really cool if we could have one here. I'm going to do a slightly controversial thing and put it where I usually put it, which is on body. I'm going to be lazy and just do BG black and text white. Fine starting point. If you want to make it nice and pretty, you can, but black background, white text, I think looks pretty sharp and it's kind of becoming the default anyways. And no, I'm not going to charge for dark mode this time, I promise. So we have this established. We have actual data here. If we want more data, there's a really fun hack I do a lot, which is now we have 3 times the data because I just dumped mock images here 3 times. This is not looking like a real app. Like, cool, we have this flex behavior that works right, but this app doesn't feel real yet. Do you know what needs to feel real? A top nav. The top nav fits a lot better in somewhere like the layout because we want this top nav to exist on other pages. Here's where we're going to start getting into the modern Next-isms. This isn't React-isms. The React-isms around React server components we'll get to in a bit, don't worry. This is more about how the actual layout works. So a layout applies consecutively. If we have a layout here and I put a top nav, I'll just make a crappy fake one of like div class name equals w full. So now it's going to be full width. And in here, I'm going to say first layout. Now we see this first layout applies here. If I make a nested route here, we'll call this layer 2. And here I put a page.tsx as well. Export default. Oh, cool. Again, autocomplete's magic. I don't want to use all this data here. I'm just going to put in here page for layout 2. Now, if we go to that URL, which is localhost3000/layer2, you'll see that the first layout persists. If we add a layout TSX into this component as well, layout.tsx, I'm just going to yoink this guy. I'm going to delete most of it, but grabbing this will make it slightly easier to define things. Specifically, I wanted the children definition. I don't need the rest. So I'm going to delete this and this. I'm going to change this from body div. We don't need any of that anymore. And we're going to call this second layout. And here's the magic of the new router. First layout applies on the outside, second layer applies in the next layer. And as you keep nesting, these layers keep getting applied. Why would you ever want this? Well, if you have something like a dashboard, like, I don't know, the uploadthing dashboard, we always want this top nav to exist everywhere you are in the app. Well, not everywhere in the app, but everywhere in the dashboard. So in the dashboard folder, we have the root layout that has this top nav. Within an app, we now have a slightly different URL. So if we go here, you see it's /dashboard/ your app ID. So once you're inside of an app, we have the side nav that is another layout that is going to be there for all of the different views inside of your dashboard. And now we have all the different pages for all the different actual locations here, but they're able to share the side nav and they're able to share the top nav nested. This type of nested layout design is so convenient, and doing this in the old model was miserable. So having it just built into Next now, incredibly overdue. This was all meant to just be like a showcase of it, so we don't need any of that code. So I'm going to delete that. This is an okay starting point for the top nav, but it's easier to break it out into a component. The sooner you can, the better. So I won't export it because we only need it here. Function top nav. Look at that. The autocomplete is so smart. We don't actually want anything here now that I see this. We could use a nav component. It's the correct thing. So yeah, I guess we'll use it. And justify between is nice because that will add the space between the elements, which we absolutely want. We'll have the left side here be a gallery. We actually aren't mounting this because I'm stupid. So I'm going to swap this div out and put our top nav there instead. And cool. Now this is gallery on the left. I absolutely want some padding on that. So let's add like P4, make it look a little less bad. Cool. Text XL, make it look a little bit beefier. Font, I want semi-bold for that, I think. Yeah, it looks nice. Border B, a nice simple border on the bottom. The border is there, you just can't see it because all these images are so high up. So we can add that either by doing additional margin below this, which works, but if you know me very well, you know I hate margin. So I will not be doing that here. Instead, for now, we'll do a flex column for the body. In the future, the correct solution is almost certainly going to be a grid, but this is a good enough starting point. I'll put a gap 4 to force some space between these elements. I forgot to actually put the flex. Flex call gap 4, cool. And now we have a little gap there. We need to finish working on this actual element though. So let's do that. So we have the gallery on one side. The other side, we'll just say sign in. I'm actually going to make it work, and you can't see it because of the screen size. When I do that, you see we have gallery on the left and we have sign in on the right. Honestly, this is a really good point to start with. This is the skeleton scaffolds getting started point I had in mind, so we can work with that. I should go checkbox that we have done this too quick though. So we'll go back in here, scaffold, basic UI, cross that off, git status, git add, commit, scaffold UI, git push. If we want to go see this build, we can, but we don't have to. Actually, on the topic of builds, I'm not going to think to do this any other time. So I'm going to add one more step here, tidy up build process. This is 2 small changes, one of which we're going to have to revert, one of which we're going to have to follow up with later, but I like doing these things sooner than later because they make everything faster. The first one is in the next config. Going to do something a bit controversial. We're going to change one of the TypeScript settings. We're going to ignore build errors. We're going to do the same thing with ESLint too. These fields we know work because we're importing the types from Next's next config. So if we spelt this wrong, we'll get a type error immediately because errors doesn't exist. Thankfully, my autocomplete with Supermaven plug, they don't pay me, but I'm actually really liking Supermaven recently. So try it out if you're curious. Copilot will work fine there too. But the point here is, even if you don't have either, I can delete that, autocomplete, and see all of the options. So I can put a custom TS config. Don't worry about that. We just want to ignore build errors. Why do we want to ignore build errors and ignore ESLint during build? Well, we can run these things separately. We can check types and we can check ESLint in a GitHub action and not have to block our builds on it. If you want everything in one place and you're okay with your builds being slower, don't bother with this step, but I'll show you just how much faster it is in a second. Speaking of faster, there's one other thing that is still admittedly early, but is just so good I don't like working without it anymore. That thing is Turbo Pack. You can turn it on by adding --turbo to your next dev command. Once you do that, you're going to have to restart your dev environment. But now with this command instead, your dev environment will spin up and update significantly faster. I have found this to be a huge quality of life win, and I highly recommend it if you haven't already. Now that we have those, let's actually commit those changes. I should add that I did those changes here. Tidy up build. Get that one last bit, commit that as build improvements. And now we can go check on Vercel to see the difference. Honestly, the easiest way to get to the Vercel UI for that is I go to the GitHub repo, click details here, command click so it opens a different window. And now we have this exact project and more importantly, this exact deploy. So we see the previous one took 46 seconds. The one before that was 51 seconds. So like not slow, but as your project gets bigger and your types get more complex, those build times can get a lot bigger, like multiple minutes long, sometimes even hours. I like to avoid that. I like my deployments to be very quick. I go out of my way for under 2 minutes. And these little changes can help you guarantee that you'll be there. Funny enough, it seems like Google's font API is causing issues and adding a solid 10 seconds or so here because it's failing to fetch that. It works fine the next retry, but the first attempt fails. That said, build times are still 40 seconds. It should be 10 seconds shorter because of that, but don't worry about it. You'll see a slight improvement over time. Now that's all configured. Let's actually start making this production ready. As I mentioned before, we need a database. I'm already in Vercel. Let's click storage. Let's click create database and make a new Postgres database. You are only allowed one Postgres database per free account on Vercel. You could pay I think it's like $10 a month for the pro tier. What you can also do is share one database across multiple projects. If you're using a tool like Drizzle specifically, there's a really cool feature that we actually have enabled by default when you use Create T3 app, where we have a prefix in all of the table names, which means that when you use Postgres or whatever database technology with Drizzle here, it will only affect things that start with this in their table name. So you can have multiple different projects using multiple different prefixes sharing a database, and it's totally fine. This might sound terrible to you, especially if you're like a developer that started post WordPress, but if you were around during the WordPress days in the old PHP era, this was the most common thing in the world. And especially for side projects, tutorials, stuff like this, there is no shame in using one database with a bunch of different prefixes for a bunch of different projects. This is actually how I'm using PlanetScale right now, funny enough. With that all said, we can use one database or we can use multiple, whatever you prefer. I'm just going to use this one. You can also use another Postgres database if you really want to, but I do think the Vercel Postgres has enough niceties here that it's worth using with this tutorial. I'm just going to name it T3 Gallery. Like obviously it's Postgres if that's the product. One more important piece here is the region you select. I highly recommend selecting a region that is the same or very close to the region that your Vercel project is deployed in. So if I go back to Vercel, you'll see the default region that it deploys in, I believe is DC. We might have set a different default location, but yeah, no, I didn't. It's DC. I live in SF. I don't love SFO1, the region, just because it's not as stable as Portland because Portland is West 2. So I'm going to go for West 2. Now all future deployments are going to be on West 2. I don't actually know if you can change regions on a free account or not, but if you can, pick one close to you. If not, East 1 is fine. You're not going to have massive slowdown or anything. More importantly though, make sure the region matches the exact same region that you have for your database or you're going to have a ton of unnecessary slowdown. Highly important that you make sure the region for your database and your project are the same in order to prevent a bunch of performance and like latency issues that you shouldn't have to deal with. You can change the prefix here if you want to have database URL instead of Postgres URL. Okay, lesson learned, and I learned this a little bit later. To save you some pain, ignore the thing I just said about changing that to database URL. Leave it as Postgres URL. It makes life much easier because Vercel wants a lot of environment variables. My bad, was loading as I go. Anyways, and now we have everything linked up and ready to go. Sadly, this is only ready to go in production. There's a couple ways we can get this environment variable stuff down locally. We could use the Vercel CLI. Honestly though, I tend to do this the lazy way. .env.local, copy snippet, hop over to my code base, go here, paste it. We don't want the old database URL anymore because we're not using that, so I'm going to comment that out. But here we go. This is all set up how you would expect. Make sure you don't share these values with anybody you don't want to see them. So like right now in this tutorial, everyone has all of my environment variables. If I don't go through and reset this afterwards, huge liability. You want to be sure these things never ever get seen by anybody who isn't a dev working on your project with you that you trust. This is important things to keep private, especially for your production environment. You also can set up different databases for production and dev if you so choose. Not necessarily for something like this, but for a real app, absolutely you want to split these things up. Cool. Now we have that done. We want to actually link stuff together. Specifically, we want to link this all with Drizzle. Their example here isn't great, but it's fine. We put the Drizzle client in a different place, but I can still copy paste the contents here, hop back to our app, go over to, guess it's not really our, no, it is our index. You'll see in our index here, we're doing a bunch of stuff to get environment variables and make sure they're all being applied correctly so we can connect to the Postgres binding. We don't need any of that. Delete all this. Realize that we haven't installed Vercel Postgres yet. So copy, hop over to our terminal, pnpm, add, paste. Back here, we don't need to reset the server. Cool, it picked up on that already. We see SQL, constdb is Drizzle SQL. One more thing I want to do here is include the schema, which we had defined before. Actually, I think the schema should be coming in from here, shouldn't it? Aren't we exporting that? We are not. So I'm going to Command Z a little bit and see what we had here before. And we see here, import star as schema from /schema. Okay, that makes sense. Import star as schema. So the reason that we're doing this import there like that is it makes life much easier for querying against your Drizzle database. The schema and the glob import here is grabbing all of the different models that we have created here. So right now we just have this one table of posts, but if you have a bunch more and you're exporting all of them, now we have all the parts we need to define our schema and then use that and consume that here. What is this mad about? Unsafe argument of type any assigned a parameter of type Vercel PG client. Sometimes you need to reload the window if TypeScript's being stupid enough. Yep, that was the issue. Everything seems to be fine now. Yeah, no idea. That was probably just because of the package being installed. Now we have constdb equals Drizzle using that. And this is using all the fancy Vercel Postgres stuff as well. We actually need to make sure the database is in the same state that our code is though. So here we have posts, which is like the default that we ship the project with. We'll be changing this in a bit, but just leaving it like this for now helps us make sure stuff's working as expected. We want to make sure this is in our actual database though. The way we do that is using a command that we've actually provided for you already, db push. If you worked with databases in other projects before, you're probably pretty familiar with the idea of migrations. You have a folder in your project with a bunch of .sql files that run a bunch of different changes to get the project up to a certain point. I don't love migrations. I find that they fail to acknowledge a lot of things that are necessary both for scaling your databases, but also for using these things with a team where like I have a bunch of diffs on Git that represent how these things change in the order they changed in. Migrations don't encapsulate that properly. They come from a pre-version control era, and I don't like using them. As such, we recommend using db push. There's a lot of content about this that you can go check out. Just we're using db push for this. Remember when I said earlier that I screwed up by putting database in the prefix here? Yeah, I did. We have to go make a couple subtle changes to fix that. The easiest way to make most of these changes is to hop over into the environment file, select the word database, Command D till all of those are selected, not the database underscore database because dumb. We want to change that to Postgres, the way it was set up by default. And now that we've done that, all the environment variables that Vercel's built-in environment variable checker expects are there. There is a catch though, which is that other things in the project expect database URL. Easiest fix for that, Command Shift F, and replace all database URL calls with Postgres URL. This will change the env.js. This will change the start database, which we're never going to use that script anyways, but it will also, most importantly, change the Drizzle config, so all our migrations will still work as expected. Apologies for the jank cuts. I made a mistake, and I figured it'd be easier to put this here than have you guys getting errors that I'm not getting in my dev environment. So once you've made this change where you swap all database URL calls with Postgres URLs, you should be able to db push in db studio fine. So let's actually do that push, which, as I mentioned before, will update the database to match our current schema. npm run db push. Done. Cool. If we want to actually see the stuff in the database, we could go write a page or an endpoint that uses this data, but I'd much rather just use another command we added, which is npm run db studio. db studio takes advantage of the Drizzle Studio project, which is super cool. They'll also give you this custom URL locally, local.drizzle.studio, and we see here T3 gallery post. This is the table that we just created. And if I want to add test data in here, it's trivial to do such. I'll do, hey, please subscribe as the name, leave all the things default, save. Cool. Now we have created out name and ID. If I actually want to see this in our project though, we have to write some code. So I will go back over to our main page TSX and make this async because we're going to have to do an await. Const posts equals await db. We have to import this not from Vercel Postgres, but from server db in our project because we want to use our database stuff. db.query. I think you can just go straight to db.query.post. Yep. Find many. Cool. And now we have posts. Let's just console log this to see it. Hop over to make sure that we're actually running this in dev because I killed my dev server earlier. I will once again run pnpm dev, make sure everything is working as expected. And hopefully, theoretically, I can refresh this page and I don't get an error. Remember that console log that we added? Wait, where's my console log? This is all mad about not having, or about having keys being reused. I'm going to get rid of those errors really quick. It's issue of me doing this stupid loop. So we're going to do a thing you're never actually supposed to do, which is use an index as a key. That is fine. That'll make those errors go away. Oh, because this isn't a string. Oh, JavaScript. Easy fix here. Now it's cast to a string. And now none of the IDs will match. Cool. So all the errors are gone. Sorry about that. Now that the errors are gone, we notice this console log isn't here. And finally, after all of that rigmarole of me making mistakes, I can show you the thing I wanted to show, which is that this component is actually running on the server, not the client. This is a very, very important distinction because previously in React land, your components ran on the server as well as on the client when you're doing server-side rendering. Now with server components, this only runs on the server, which is a huge, huge difference because it means I can do a database call and not have to worry about it. I can even call SQL directly here. There's a lot of reasons you wouldn't want to, but you can. Let's actually use this data now. Right now we have these mock images. I'm just going to make another map above it. Post.map, post. Cool. That's the right amount of friends. This is max. We don't have a key. Post.id. Cool. And now we have, hey, please subscribe. If we do more posts, those will all appear here as well. We can confirm that by going back to Drizzle Studio, adding a record, another post, saving, come back to our app and refresh. And now we see another post. Dope. But we don't want posts, we want images. First, this is in a good enough state that I want to commit it though. So let's spin up a terminal that's capable of that. I'm going to kill Drizzle Studio for now. Git status. We got a lot of things to add. The env example changed. Connection string changed. We added Vercel Postgres. That has a handful of dependencies. Totally fine. Server DB got added. That got added. Environment variable changes. Database setup. And now I just remembered I made that mistake with the environment variables. So this is going to fail for me. But if I go yoink these and dump them, this is a thing you shouldn't have to do unless you made the same mistake of me of naming your environment variables with the prefix and not realizing how much shit that broke. But yeah, this shouldn't be a problem for you. Can you believe this is my third time building this project and I'm still making dumb mistakes like this? Software's not easy, boys. Now all of those are added. The first deploy is probably going to fail because they weren't there. Oh, I forgot to push because I'm stupid. Cool. Now we're pushing. That build should go just fine. And as promised, we are now deployed. We can go to the URL and see nice and clearly this works and the data is coming from the database. The URL is production. This is in our local database, but I can go make changes using Drizzle Studio. One more. Saved. Oh, I wasn't running Drizzle Studio locally anymore, so we lost that. So let me rerun that super quick. npm run db studio. Refresh this. I'm lazy to retype, so I'm just going to delete, hey, please subscribe, because you've subscribed by now, right? You're an hour into this. Come on. Subscriptions are free. Now that we've done that, we can go back here, refresh. And we see one of my favorite Next-isms, which is that when you deploy a Next.js application, this page gets cached on the server. So the first time somebody goes to this page, it's created. And even though I'm hitting refresh and we should be getting a different page content here, we're not, because Next doesn't know this route's supposed to be dynamic. You can tell it, hey, by the way, Next, this route is always dynamic. You do that by doing anything in the route that makes it clear this is specific to the user. So if I called request in here somewhere, which is a Next helper to actually get request data. So I don't know if there's one for request, but there's headers where I can use Next headers, which means I'm now doing something theoretically different every time a user goes to this page, which forces the route to be dynamic. If I use auth or things like that, same deal. We don't need any of that because we just want the page to be dynamic. Something I should have had you do much earlier in the project that makes stuff like this a little more consistent is selecting a TypeScript version. I know it sounds silly, but by default, TypeScript doesn't use the TypeScript version for your project. It uses the one built into VS Code. We want to tell it, no, use the one that's for this project. Don't just do this in literally any project, because theoretically someone could be using a malicious thing for TypeScript that could be used here instead. We know that this is just using the latest version of TypeScript because we installed that via package.json. You're running all this code anyways, you're fine. Press enter on that. And now we're using a different version of TypeScript, but this one includes all of the Next.js bindings and things like that they built into the Next.js plugin. So now if I do export const runtime, we'll get autocomplete for all the different options. We don't want to do runtime though. We want to do dynamic. And look at that, our autocomplete smart, but I can also do this. And we see we have auto, force dynamic, error, or force static. Our goal here is to force dynamic because we want to make sure every time a change is made in our database that this page's content is updated on the next visit. So by doing that, going back over here, git status, git add -a, because I'm also going to add that VS Code change, which is just part of the folders config. Commit, what did we just do? We added force dynamic plus VS Code stuff. Cool. Git push that guy up. And now, theoretically, when this new build is ready, we should have an app that's actually dynamic. Now we have the deployed version, and it looks like it only has another post there. So if I click it, we see old page has the old data, but this one has just that. If I go in here and I change this to dynamic works now, save this change, and we go back here, refresh it, dynamic works now. Also, that page loads hilariously fast because again, the region the server's in and the region the database is in are the same, and it has to spin up all these connections and other things. It's really fast. It's really cool. But now we can go check off an important and very stressful box. Our database is set up. Look at all that progress in just under an hour. Not bad, right? Oh, I guess we technically attached the database to the UI, but I meant a lot more here. Specifically, I meant building the actual schema for the database, which thankfully won't be too complex. I'm going to close all the stuff we have open because it's nice to have a clean IDE. I'm known for going out of my way to keep things probably too clean inside of my dev environment. Yeah, we don't need any of the files we had open before. We just want schema.ts. I'm going to be hilariously lazy here. We're going to select post, Command D. We're going to change this to image. We have images, which is on the image table. So this will be T3 gallery _ image in our database. But we need more than this. I still want to keep name because name is useful for indicating that a file has a name. I also want to make sure that it's not null because we don't want to have a file in our database that doesn't have a name. We also don't want to have one that doesn't have a URL. Since we'll be using uploadthing, we can theoretically limit the URL length to a very small number. I'd prefer to just do a big one. So I'll do 1024 for the URL. It would also potentially be nice to index your URLs if you were ever going to do a database lookup via the URL to find the project that it's from, but not a big deal. Always things you can add and remove later, and unused indexes are not great. Now that we have this done, we have the table updated. We actually need to persist these changes to our database, which is pretty trivial to do. Again, be careful when you're doing stuff like this against your production database, because this change is actually going to break production. I'll show you what I mean in a second. You might even be able to see part of this here, where it's trying to find many on something it doesn't think exists. So pnpm run db push. It's going to give us warnings because it's a destructive change. First, it's going to say, are we renaming another table or are we making a new one? We could call it a rename because technically that's how we built it, but this table is meant to be new and have different data. So I'm going to do create table instead. Yes, I want to remove one table. Now all the old data is gone, but that's fine. It was one mock row. The scary part now is if I go to our production deployment, application error, server-side error occurred because the code in production thinks there are different tables than there actually are in our dev environment. When you're working on a project and haven't shared it with anybody yet, this is totally fine, but this is why it makes sense to have a different dev environment and production environment for your database. So when you make changes like this, it doesn't break the thing you have in production. Also, I refresh this, T3 gallery post does not exist anymore. Drizzle Studio doesn't know what to do with itself. I probably have to relaunch it since we made those changes. Look at that, T3 gallery image is here. Remember we have all this mock data? What if we just go add that to the database and we don't actually need to use mock data for the data? Let's collapse the sidebar because it's taking up too much space. Copy up over here, add record. We'll just do 4 for that. Paste that, name 1.png, and grab this one. 2.png, paste the URL. Let's name these all ahead of time. PNG, 4.png, back here, copy, paste, copy, paste. Now we have all this mock data in the database. It's funny, it did not put those in the order that I put them in here. I can change the file names to make it easier to see in our actual project though. Cool. Save those changes. And now the names all match their IDs. Isn't that nice? We actually want to use this. So right now we're doing query post. Post doesn't exist. I delete that. Autocomplete recognizes its images now. Change posts to images. Delete this weird thing we were doing here because we don't need that anymore. Delete all the mock stuff because we're not using that anymore either. And now, instead of mock images 3 times, we could just use images 3 times. We also could just use images once. Regardless, we did it. Nice and easy. We're actually getting data from database now. We know that because, well, I could show you. We'll flex call our div here, and I'll put another div here for the name. And now they all have their names underneath them. One other thing I want to change about the query here is order. By default, the order is going to be from the oldest item in the database to the newest. We want to flip that. We want to go inverse on IDs. How do we do that? Well, Drizzle has a bunch of handy helpers. I'll admit, not quite as elegant as the things that we expect from Prisma, but still pretty solid ergonomics-wise. Here we want to change order by, and here we get 2 values. We get the model, and we get an object that has a bunch of helpers. In this case, we want the descending helper. And that's it. Descending means descend. You can do ascending as well. You could do like sum and all of these other helpers that exist inside of Drizzle. I guess it's just ascend, descend, and then a custom SQL call. We want to descend based on the model's ID. This could be whatever name you want. This is just the actual shape of the model we're using, so you don't have to import it from somewhere else. But this little syntax makes it nice and easy to define which order you want things in. If we go back to the page, we see 4321, 4321, 4321 now. See? Isn't that better? This is all linked up now. We're also fetching files for everyone. So this is all of the images on the service. Obviously, we want the service to be specific to the user that's signed in, but in order to do that, we have to have the ability for users to sign in. So let's go take a look at our to-do list, and you'll see now is a great time to add authentication. I'm going to quickly save the changes that we just made and push them so we can make sure they're working in production. Git add -p, checkbox is done, new formatting there, table changes, comma that wasn't there before. Now we have actually linking the database to the UI. Git push. And let's go take a look on Vercel. Make sure these things are actually getting built. Gallery deployments, almost done. Another successful deployment, only 35 seconds. Those build times are still nuts. Cool. Hop over in the production build and we see we have all our images coming in. What we don't have is a working sign-in button. Still just text. It's not doing anything. In fact, we don't have really any client behaviors right now. Time to fix that. Close, close. We can close the GitHub for now. Upload thing we can close. That deployment we can close. We need to open something though. I said this at the beginning of the video. I'm going to say it again now. Check the pinned comment to see if this has been changed. I am using the beta Clerk version because there's a lot of things I did not like about the last Clerk version that they have fixed after me pestering them for a long time. I will also insist that if you're not interested in Clerk and you don't want to use auth that costs money, there are plenty of phenomenal free and open source solutions now. You can check out Next.js, you can check out Lucia. Both are great. I use Clerk because it is better. Turns out when you have a team of hundreds of people being paid a lot of money to full-time focus on making a really good auth platform, they succeed. And I have found life much easier since we adopted Clerk. You want to see what I mean? You can check out uploadthing. It flies, and Clerk's a huge part of why. I just went to the beta Clerk docs though. Why did I do that? Well, Clerk is about to overhaul their entire core. Is it going to be part of their version 5? But the important part is Clerk Core 2. The actual core to how Clerk works, including the middleware, the auth layer, and all of those parts, has been overhauled. The result is faster, but more importantly, it fixes a bunch of stupid shit that they did before. The big thing that they did is they would block routes by default via auth. So if you weren't authenticated, you couldn't go to certain pages on your project. I think that's bad practice. There are use cases where it makes sense for like internal dashboards and stuff, but for the most part, you should be checking on the page whether or not a user should be able to load data on it, rather than checking in middleware if a user should be able to go to the page in the first place. It's just not a good pattern for authentication, and I don't recommend it. They finally realized they were wrong and walked it back. This is a much needed upgrade, and I'm excited to showcase why. They have an upgrade guide, which is a nice way to do it. They even have a CLI that will help you through all of the specific steps if you set up Clerk the old way, but we're just going to skip that and set it up the right way. Here they have a nice simple example, which we're going to yoink. This goes in the middleware TS, but first we have to actually install Clerk. I'm going to open up the migration guide. So they have a upgrade guide. We're not upgrading, we're starting from scratch, but that's fine because all of those parts will be good. We don't need to install the newest version of React. We're already on it with Next. We do need to add the beta Next.js binding though. So we're gonna click copy on the npm command, paste, run. They have the upgrade helper, which we don't need. The big thing we do need is the new middleware. So if we hop over to the example here, I honestly like this one from their docs quite a bit. I'll be sure that all of these things are linked in the description if you just want to copy paste, but honestly, I can go through this line by line and I think it's actually pretty helpful. We want to go into source, and this is important because there is no good error message if you name this wrong. I learned this on my first attempt filming this video, where I missed the E in middleware, and it took me 20 minutes to figure out what was going wrong. So make sure middleware.ts is spelled correctly, because otherwise you'll go insane. Here we have a relatively simple auth function. Here we have a custom isProtectedRoute, which is a route matcher that uses this syntax for seeing if you're on the dashboard route. And then we check if isProtectedRoute, then we auth protect. Otherwise, we don't do anything. Nice and simple. Thankfully, we don't really care because we're not going to be protecting any routes, at least not yet, and certainly not in this traditional sense. But regardless, this default config is fine. We have the protected routes. We export default Clerk middleware that runs, and we have this config, which is the default too. This is the exact same as it was before. So if you go and grab the exact config code from any of the existing like Clerk examples or their docs, new or old, this is the same. This is just saying to Next, hey, we want this to run on pretty much everything, which allows for your auth to be much more consistent. I could go really in depth on how Clerk is doing this auth. Just know that it's not actually going to slow down every single request. It will slow down the first one every minute or so, and the rest will be basically immediate. This new Clerk beta is also way lighter in terms of like the package size and the runtime costs. So it's a really solid option. I'm actually much more hyped about the Clerk beta than I would have expected. Now that we have this done, we need to actually go implement it in the app. So if we just look up like the standard Clerk docs, you'll see how easy it is to set up the next stuff. Quick start, next. And here's the part that hasn't changed. @Clerk/Next.js. This goes in your root layout because your root layout wraps everything and you probably want your auth in everything. So we'll just put this import up top here, Clerk provider, copy, scroll down, wrap this, cut, paste, save, cool. And that's it. Auth is done. There's a lot more we can do with it. At the very least, we have authentication in the like in quote sense working in our application. We want to do more than that. We want to actually be able to sign in. So we're going to add some more components to the top nav. Honestly, now is a good time to break out top nav in its own component. I'm going to introduce you guys to a fun little pattern in App Router, the underscore. When you use an underscore in front of a folder name in App Router, you're telling App Router, by the way, don't include this in the routing. So if I put a page.tsx in here, that will never become a page. This is just not accessible outside of it being imported other places. This is useful if you just want to tell Next, hey, nothing in here is a route, don't treat it as such. So you can have these little component folders that are used for things related to the specific route you're on. Not a big deal. You can also use like a global component folder too, but I like keeping these more specific to the current area components separated in this way. Honestly, I would keep it all in one file if it wasn't for the fact that sometimes you need client components. components and server components. And when you do that, you need separate files. Whether or not that was the right design decision, we could argue about all day. I honestly think it was. While we're in here and cleaning things up, I can't help but notice we left this as create T3 app. Let's quickly change this to T3 gallery, and we'll change the generated by as well. Generated by a loyal subscriber to Theo on YouTube. Cool. That's all done. Hop back over to our top nav that we've exported. We want to make this a real sign-in though. I'm going to leave this all within one div so that we're sure it gets shifted properly to the right with the justify between call for the flexbox. We'll do two really handy components. Signed out. This is a component that Next provides that is only going to work if you're signed out. So whatever children are within this component only get rendered if you're not signed in. So if you're signed out, we'll render the sign in button. And if we are signed in, we'll instead render the user button. Make sure those are all imported from Clerk. Oh, we forgot one more important piece. We actually haven't set up Clerk. That would be useful, wouldn't it? Go to the Clerk site, dashboard. We need to set up a new project. This little button here, create application. I already have a T3 gallery app, so I should probably rename that, whatever. We'll just do gallery for this one. I'm going to turn off email sign-in because I don't want it. I want this to be nice and simple with OAuth. I like GitHub sign-in, so I'll add that too. But how cool is it that you can just scroll through here and add any of these options without having to do any additional configuration? And once you want to set things up with your own keys in the future, you absolutely can. Yoink the environment variables, hop over here, paste. Since these environment variables aren't being used by code we write so much as by the package we've imported, we don't have to add them to the env.js. If we want to be sure they're always in the environment, we get a good error, we can. But as we just saw when we were running this locally, we got a pretty good error anyways. So like, it's not the biggest deal if we don't. See the error missing Clerk secret key or API key? Because of that, I'm not too concerned. That said, before we forget, I am absolutely going to go add these on Vercel. Vercel, T3 gallery, settings, environment variables. Again, you should have different Clerk environment variables in production and development. We're not doing that because it's meant to be a tutorial, but yeah, once you're really doing these things, be careful. Also, next public, the prefix in front of environment variable means this will be part of the bundle that users get. So never put sensitive data in a key value pair in your environment variables that starts with next public, because this is going to go to users. In this case, they just use that for identifying which app they should be authenticating against. The secret key is the one that actually uses your backend stuff. This one is safe. Just don't put the next public in front. Save that for all environments. You didn't have to do that for dev, but you have to do that for prod, so I just figured why not do it now. And here we see we now have a real sign-in button. It looks exactly the same because they're honoring the text like size as specified above. When we click it, we go to this page, thing with GitHub, authorize Clerk, and now we're in. And you can see if I don't have my side there. See this little guy? Isn't that nice? Ta-da. And it's all just built into Clerk. No work had to be done to add account management, the ability to connect and disconnect different accounts, all these annoying to set up things just comes with Clerk. It'd be nice if everything did that. I know it's crazy to think, but yeah, auth is done. Again, I think Clerk's surprisingly great, and this is all of the reasons why. So let's hop over to our README. We added authentication. Obviously, we want this in our actual project. I'm just doing -a, we added new files, and -p does not also include new files that you added. And I want to make sure that this is working as well. While this is deploying, I'm thinking of other things I want to do. And again, this is why I like having a list like this, because it's really easy to break things up where it makes sense to. So one thing I was thinking of is Taint, server only. We'll go in detail what I mean here in a bit, but I want to make sure that I'm introducing patterns that make using the server component architecture incredibly maintainable. And right now we're just inlining stuff in our function components. We can do better. And I'm just calling out here that I want to do that. So now we have this deployed. If we go back to T3 Gallery Olive, you'll see we have a sign in button in production on our production URL. Sign in, continue with GitHub, authorize. Ta-da. Isn't that cool? That it's really that easy to set up auth. We should probably do more with said auth though. Like right now, the homepage just shows all of the images regardless of anything. So let's fix that quick. That's just gonna annoy me if I don't. We'll do signed out div class name equals w full h full text 2xl. Please sign in above. Make sure you actually import the signed out component. And now this guy with all the actual contents here, I'm going to break into its own component. It makes life easier. We'll be moving it somewhere else in the future. Images. Return. Cool. As Maddox doesn't actually have the images because those are here. Cut. Paste. I forgot to make it async. Images. And now signed in. I have to import signed in as well. But now, if I go back to my dev environment, which by the way, if you haven't already made this mistake, always make sure you're in local dev when you're actually testing dev stuff. So one of the cool things I like about Arc is the URL actually appears and has this bright color when you're in localhost stuff. So you're less likely to make these mistakes. Cool. So I'm signed in right now. If I sign out, please sign in above. I wanted the text centered. So let's text center. Nice. Please sign in above. Cool. Sign in, GitHub, authorize, and now we have our images back. Isn't that cool? Let's be real. It's so cool that it's that easy to set something like that up now, like surreal. I'm going to commit that too, because those are important enough changes. Git status, git add -p, git commit -m, use auth or for homepage. Cool. I also remembered one more thing I wanted to put in the list. I'll put that after taint. Use next image component. That one has complications, but it's also literal magic. So I want to make sure we have that included in here. But now we want to actually add image uploading, which means I want to have individual users able to authenticate, do an upload, and have that appear on their homepage. This is where things usually would get more complex, specifically once you have to pull in S3, but we made a thing for this. We made an upload thing for this, and I'm really proud of what we built with upload thing. I know, like, obviously I could sit here and say I'm proud of all of my stuff, but we made upload thing because doing file management was way harder than it needed to be, and we wanted to fix that. And I really honestly think we did. And when you follow along for this part, I think you'll understand why too. API keys, copy, hop over to our code base, go to the .env, paste. Now we have our environment variables set up for upload thing. Actually getting it set up pretty easy too. I'll just go to the docs. Next.js app router, because we're using the app directory. Copy this command, paste this command. We already added the environment variables. And here is where things start to get fun. I'm going to copy and make this file first, but I'll explain some cool stuff as we're doing it. So if we hop over here, we're going to make a new folder. Well, you can also, in VS Code, really handy trick, make a new file. If you do slashes in it, it'll make the paths for you. So if we do API/upload_thing/core.ts, paste, save, it just does that correctly, which is really cool. This auth call is using a fake auth function. So I'm just going to immediately delete that and use the actual auth function from Clerk. Note that in the beta, the auth function comes from Next.js/server, not just Clerk/Next.js. This means they don't have to import the whole Clerk Next.js package every time you just want auth, which makes everything surprisingly more performant. Also, user ID is its own named field on the user object that's returned here. And I'm just going to make sure that user ID doesn't exist and throw if they're not authorized. Cool. So now with this image uploader, which we'll explain in detail in a moment, they're actually authenticated with those few file changes. It's actually that easy. Previously, if you wanted to do an API endpoint in the pages router, you'd have to use their special /API folder in order to expose kind of janky Express-like syntax. It was Express, but Express isn't the standard. Now they're using this stuff with web standards, and it's surprisingly easy to define an endpoint. I'll do a quick export function get. This will have a request and a response object in it, but I don't even care. I just want to show return new response, sure, hello world. And now if I open up a terminal and I curl localhost 3000 /API/upload thing, hello world. Isn't that cool? Is that easy to just define an API endpoint inside of your next project? You just make a route.ts, and now that will be what gets hit when you do get. I could change this to be post. Same deal. Why does this matter though? Well, we have to actually expose upload thing so that the client can use it for stuff, because it's a client-server relationship that's somewhat complex. And we want to make sure we can handle all the things that your server and your client need to do to authenticate and manage file uploads correctly. Actually, linking this is pretty easy once you have your router. So we'll scroll down a little bit. We see the route.ts contents, copy, paste, and we don't even need the custom configs. We're using everything with defaults. Here we're exporting a get and a post function that we defined for you with our route handler using your file router. Should probably break down what the file router is now, so we can understand how this all comes together. The file router is kind of like a definition of all the ways users can upload files in your application. So if you have one place where you have like posts where a user can post something like Twitter or Facebook, and you limit them to up to 4 videos or 10 images can be posted, you would define post uploader with the right syntax here for defining what you are and aren't allowing, the max file sizes, max amounts, etc. All of these different keys are different things a user can upload to. Each of them has their own requirements for what types of files can be uploaded, their own types of middleware for how you are authenticating the user and deciding if they can or can't upload. And also, whatever you return here gets linked to the onUpload complete, so when the file upload is done, you still have this data. And then you have the onUpload complete, which again is different for every single one of your endpoints, but allows you to do whatever you need to do. In this case, we're going to want to persist the file you uploaded to your database. Getting all of these things set up correctly in the past was incredibly difficult and would also require that you upload the file to your own server, which we avoid because we're using pre-signed post URLs to allow the user to upload straight to us at uploadthing. So you don't have to eat the ingest and output costs either. So no egress costs, none of that chaos, and also no worries about a file being uploaded and you never being notified because we call this on upload complete for you via our webhooks. So how does this all actually come together? Like, how do we use this image uploader? I'm not going to change any more code in here for now. We'll come back, don't worry. We actually want to do an upload. We need a component to do that though. Ideally, a component that has an upload button. We could use the tailwind wrapper, which is really, really cool, especially when you're doing custom styling of our elements. I'm going to be lazy though. We're just going to use the import that we can throw in the layout. I will say that if you're using Turbo, the tailwind wrapper isn't functioning at the moment I'm recording this. I think the PR that fixes it is up though. So by the time you're seeing this, that might even be fixed. But for now, it's easier to just put this import right below our global CSS styles. And now our buttons will be styled properly. Scroll a little further, create the upload thing components, recommended. Yeah, highly recommended. Hop back here. I think it makes sense to put this in a utils folder in source, new folder upload thing.ts. Paste, save, and now we have an upload button in drop zone that are using the type definitions from our file router. Why are we using the types here? Well, if we want to use this upload button now, anywhere else in the code base, it's just gonna work. It's magical. The cool thing here, if I just show you, I'll actually throw this in the top nav, and I'll put this next to the signed in state. So I'll do a div in here. Actually, I don't even need to do that there. I'll do this class name equals flex row. And now inside of here, I can put upload button. It's going to want to import from our package. Don't do that. Import from your code base, the utils/upload thing. Why are we getting a type error here? If we hover over it, you'll see endpoint is missing. So if we start typing in here, endpoint equals, we actually get autocomplete for all of the different endpoints that exist in our router. So if you were to go rename this or remove it from the actual upload thing config on your server side, on your backend, I change this from image uploader to image upload, and save, you'll immediately see we're getting a type error in the top nav because image uploader doesn't exist. It's expecting image upload. It's not assignable type image upload. Cool. So if we go back, core, save, now we're good. And now we see our choose file button. It's a little ugly, but it'll get the job done. You can click here. You can pick a picture. Let's do an older one so we know we actually got a different one. Epic Microsoft Meta. Cool. The image has been uploaded. We won't have any real proof of that because we didn't do anything with it. But if we go to the terminal here, we'll see successfully simulated callback. Cool, cool, cool. We have this uploaded file and we can command click it. And here's the file we just uploaded. But as I mentioned before, we didn't do anything with the file. So if I refresh this, you're not going to see anything here. Where would we do that though? Because this, at least theoretically, should be a client component. We're handling that for you with the upload button, but this isn't server code. We can't really write an onComplete here because that would have to run on client. So how do we actually do something? Well, again, this is the magic of what we built with upload thing. On upload complete runs on your server when the upload is done. So here we have all of the data as well as the metadata for the user that did the upload, which we'll use in a minute. But for now, I just want to showcase all of these things coming together properly. So let's throw this in our database. Await DB, import from server DB. .insert. Since we're doing an insert instead of a query, we do actually have to use the table definition, which we can import images. Now we want to insert values. Here we have a name, which is file.name, as well as a URL, which is file.url. Now we're done. Now this will get inserted. I'm just going to delete some of these comments because they're in the way. Cool. We can go try another upload quick because it really is this simple. Let's do the new React Native architecture thumbnail. Cool. Wait, where is it? I don't see it anywhere. If I refresh, it appears though. So how do we make that appear when this is done? Oh boy, we got a lot to do for that one. Not actually that much, just like a couple changes in mental map model things I want to help you understand. Before we do all of that though, I want to go kill that repeat code because we have enough images. We don't need this to repeat anymore. So we'll just change this to be images. And now you don't have to worry about repeats either. So we can get rid of all this junk with the IDs and just delete that and use image.id. You don't even need the index anymore. And now we see this all appeared. So we want to do something once the upload is completed. We have an onUpload complete here, on client upload complete. And here we would want the page content to refresh. So we want to do something inside of here. Before we can do that though, we need to make this run on client. Thankfully, we're not doing any server-side stuff in this file, so doing such is actually pretty trivial. You just go to the top, use client. Cool. Now this file runs on client. See why I wanted to break this out earlier? If we hadn't done that, then we would get errors when we run this. So now we want to actually have the ability to refresh the page contents. We're going to use some really cool patterns with the next navigation router stuff. So const router equals use router. There are two, again, things you can import from. So be careful. You want to make sure you're importing from next navigation here, not next router, which name something differently. It is what it is. What we're actually going to do with this, we're going to router.refresh. Router refresh is kind of magical. It basically reruns the current route you're on the server and sends you down the necessary parts to update the page's content. So now when the upload is completed, we'll refresh this on the client side. Invalid state readable streams already. Cool. I don't care what you think is wrong. You're wrong. Close that. Refresh. Make sure we're not getting any errors anywhere. That all appears to be working as expected. Let's do a test upload. We'll do the HTMX logo. Why not? Sure, it'll fit the page great. And now it appeared. Isn't that crazy? Once you have the use client on the top, it's literally 2 lines of code. And just to showcase what I mean with the use client being forgotten, if I rerun this, you'll see error, use router only works in client components. Hooks need to be in client components because hooks are all about the component updating once it's on the client's device. Yeah. It's nice that the errors are now good enough that you get that feedback as you're doing your work. So now we have the ability to upload images, but these images are uploaded for anyone to see. If I was to switch accounts, then everyone would still be able to see all of the images, which is not what we want. We want a personal gallery for just you as the individual that did the upload. So we need to mark that in our database somehow. So let's hop over to our database. We're going to add one more additional field, which is user ID. This is recommending doing traditional database reference models, which, yeah, makes a lot of sense for complex data models. But since Clerk is our auth layer and we have such a simple binding between our auth table and our actual image representations here, we can just do a varchar for this. It's fine. And they'll never be that long, but again, it's fine. So now that we have this, we actually want to use this user ID and assign it when we create a new image. So if I go back to the uploadthing core, you'll see something's missing here because we're missing one of those not nullable fields. There we go. Since we returned user ID here in the middleware function, we now have access to it in the onUploadComplete function. This is important because onUploadComplete's not being called directly by the user. So if you used the auth helper function here, you're not going to get the data you're looking for in onUploadComplete. So you need to run this in the middleware, which the user called. And now you have the data, which exists for when you do this call later. Just wanted to include that because having access to this data might not be the most intuitive thing, but that's why we built this return metadata pattern. Almost think of it like React hooks with use effect having the return that runs things slightly different. We wanted to make this chainable and as simple as possible, where the return from here is accessible on the input here. And now it's done. We have to update the database model, which sadly is going to cause the existing data to go away, but that's fine. We can start re-uploading all the images immediately afterwards. So let's actually update the database. pnpm run db push. It's telling us that we're going to lose data because we're about to add a non-nullable table with no default value, which contains 6 items. So we made user ID not nullable, but there's already data in the database. So if we added a field that isn't nullable, what's going to happen to the old data? It's just going to delete it. The right way to do these types of migrations, if you want to incrementally move to these things, is don't make it non-nullable, let it be nullable, make the change, backfill all the data, and then in a later change it to be non-nullable. I don't care though. We're just going to do that. Now we're done. And if we go back to our homepage, you'll see there is no data because of course there isn't data yet. We haven't done anything that would allow there to be data yet. So let's upload our first images. Well, first image, let's just do one at a time right now, which I can show you how to fix in a second. Uploading. And now we have the React Native Flutter image. Pretty cool, right? But we want to do multiple. And I want to show you just how easy it is to do that. 4 megabytes is probably a good max file size, but we want to increase the max file count. Let's do a big number, 40. Oh, I didn't update the client side yet. So refresh that and it updated. You'll also see that the button has to flicker in. I'll fix that in just a moment. But here we see choose files, images up to 4 megabytes, max 40. Cool. Click. And now I can select, let's just do these 2 and node next. I can upload multiple images at once now. And it's that easy to do it. Ta-da. Isn't it cool how easy this stuff is now? That button is hideous, so I'm going to want to fix that in a moment. But first I promised I would fix the way the button flickers in, so let's do that. It's actually back in these docs that we didn't finish because things were so fun to play with. Here is one of the crazy hacks that I built with Julius, our uploadthing SSR plugin. The way this works is during the SSR process, we embed some data in the page so we have everything we need to know what your button's allowing to upload. So we say here, based on what you define in the backend, images up to 4 megabytes, max 40. If we want that data to be there as soon as the page loads, you just go to your layout, TSX at the root. You find somewhere in here you want to drop this. I think technically it has to be in the HTML, so I'll drop it in there. Import our next SSR plugin. Import the extract router config, and then import our file router. This one comes from your code base, API, upload thing. You get the idea. And now with all of that imported, we go back here and refresh. The button is preloaded and will always have the right content, even if the Clerk sign-in button sadly does not have that same awesome behavior. It is funny to me that there's more layout shift from the Clerk button than from our upload button component, even though ours is more complex. But yeah, call out to Clerk, fix your preloading behaviors. It's not that hard to do. Anyways, now we have this button with all the server-side stuff pre-rendered, all the behaviors working as expected. And one more step before I forget, because let's be real, you've forgotten to copy the upload thing secret and app ID, hop back over to Vercel quick, T3 gallery, settings, environment variables, paste, save. And now, with those environment variables handled, we are ready to push this up. Status. Again, I'm adding everything because we added so many new folders. Load thing added. Did I get pushed? Even get persisted there? Cool. We have now pushed up those changes. And with another service added, once again, I think it's important to make sure it actually deploys and works. Closing all these tabs, I don't need them anymore. 58 seconds later, we have now updated our production build. If we hop over here, we see I'm signed in. We have the choose files button, all as expected. We'll click that good old choose files. We will upload something that is different so we know it worked. Apple USA, cool. It's loading. And in just a moment, it's uploaded. Ta-da! We now have a production service that delivers the core promise of this tutorial, which is we have images uploading. That said, I think we're just getting started and the fun stuff is about to happen. This is a lot of the boilerplate for getting these parts together, but things are about to get a lot more advanced. We're going to learn all about the taint, which is the best practice for handling your server behaviors in your React applications. Next image, which is making those image components significantly better. Error management, routing. God, the routing stuff's so cool. The stuff we're going to be doing there is great. So I could rant about all these things. If you're looking for a time to take a break, now is probably a good one because we're about to take a big pivot as we dive all in on the taint. Back from my break, and no, my hair didn't change. So don't think about it too much. Anyways, we're going to start implementing the taint. But what am I talking about? What the hell is React Taint? Well, you might have already seen my video about it. If not, I'll do a very brief overview. This is from Sebastian from the Vercel team. This is a little bit about how to think about security in Next.js. The key piece from this blog post to understand is the idea of the data access layer. They give 3 examples of how you can get data from the server on your applications using something like Next. The first obvious solution is just traditional HTTP APIs. The second example, which is what we'll be moving to, is the data access layer. The third, which is what we were just doing, is component level data access. So if we go to our component on the page, our images component, you'll see here that we're directly awaiting db.query.images.findMany. This is really nice for quickly scaffolding and setting up projects like this, but it means it's really hard to manage and maintain consistency and security within your code base. People were always really concerned when they saw that silly example of having some SQL inside of your component like this. They really misunderstood because they thought this code was going to client. It's not. The security issue here has nothing to do with the fact that this code exists in a component. It's just that your location where all of these things are happening is kind of spread out across your code base instead of living in one specific place. The pattern that I highly recommend that we've been using in most of our code bases is actually a little misleadingly simple. We just put everything in this server folder. So if we're doing queries, we have functions like this, and we want to make sure that these are exposed and securely written. We put those in a separate file in server. So what I would do here is just put queries.ts. And one more important piece, they actually detail this in the said blog post of server only. Server only is a package that isn't actually much of a package. It's very, very simple. A lot of people seem to think when you put use server at the top of a file, what this means is that this file is only on server the same way like use client is only on client. Neither of those things are true. Use client means that it ships JavaScript to the client, but the code still runs on the server. Use server means it's exposing an endpoint for the client to hit. We'll be using this in a bit, specifically for when we're creating the delete functions, but that's not what we want here because I want this file to only work on the server side and never work on the client side. The way we make sure of that is import server only. Since we have this package here, we should probably go install it quick because otherwise this will not work at all. So let's do that super fast. Copy the name up here, get one of my open terminals, pnpm, add server only. Cool. That is done. Now let's actually write this query. So we want to get all of the images based on not much data here, just db query images, find many for all of the images. So let's just yoink this for now. Cut, export, async, function. Look at that. I'm not going to trust the autocomplete perfectly here. We can just do that ourselves. Obviously, I have to import db, and now we're done. Well, not fully done. I have to go back here and actually const images equals await get images, and obviously import this as well. This might seem like a kind of silly and arbitrary change. I know I'm one to say like keep things in one file where it makes sense. It's small and silly as this seems, it is actually really nice for maintaining your code base over time. Having one place where all of your queries live makes it very easy to audit, optimize, make changes, and see where they persist, stuff like that. Otherwise, what you'll end up with is 15 places with this await db.query.images call instead of this one function that you hit instead. This is particularly important now that we're going to make changes where this only works for one specific user. Because right now, if we switched user accounts, we'd still see everyone's images because nothing here indicates we should only be getting one user's images. So the change we have to make here is, again, somewhat obvious. We need to make sure this function only returns the images that this current user who signed in now should have access to. In order to do that, we have to decide where we actually get the user ID. There's a couple different ways we can do that. We could fetch the ID in here and pass it. So we would have like user ID string that gets passed, or we can actually do the authentication in here. Personally, I'm fine just doing the auth call in here, but it's not too big a deal either way. Just ideally you pick one pattern and stick with it, or you have a consistent wrapper pattern where you always have the auth calls in the same place. Otherwise it gets messy fast. Personally, the way I would do this is I would rename the function get my images, where my is the current user. Const user equals auth. If no user ID, throw this error unauthorized. And now we know this is the case. And we can also do a where check here, model EQ, ta-da, good old autocomplete. What this is saying is effectively that we want to select all of the images from our database where the user ID is the same as the one that we have here. So model.user ID, this is the one for the reference for the images that we're querying. And then user ID here is the one that we're actually getting from our auth call. So this should make sure we're only getting the images that this user should be able to see. I think it's worth quickly testing this, or I have to rename this first because I renamed the function. But now this all seems to work as expected. Only one way to test it though. Hop back over, open our project up, and we can still see all of the images, but that's because I was using this one account. What I need to do now is switch accounts. Previously I was signing with GitHub. I want to test a different account. So this time I'm going to be signing with my Google account. So we go sign in, we go to Google, continue, and now we're back here. And I don't see any images. I don't see any images because I don't have any images. It's a different account. If I was to comment out these two lines and go back here, I have all the images again because they were uploaded on a different account. By doing those additional checks and these additional bits of code here, we are now certain that there is no way a user will see images that don't belong to them. And as long as we're not calling DB queries in other places, it should be relatively easy for us to look through this one file and make sure all of the places that return images are properly authenticated. Once you want to implement things like delete, this gets even more important. So we haven't formally used React Taint, and I honestly don't think we'll need to for this project. The reason you would use Taint is if you have some data you don't want to return to the user. So if I was passing props to something that was like a client component, and I wanted to make sure we didn't have data like in this user object, we have stuff like user.sessions or user.token or get token. If we called this, token might not be the best example here, but let's say user. Do they have any metadata? Okay, this might not be the best example because this doesn't have data that we don't want on it. But let's say when we fetched the images from database that there was some field we didn't want. Like let's pretend we don't actually want the URL to get to the users. What Taint would do is allow us to wrap the specific keys inside of this object to tell the React compiler, hey, never, ever, ever, ever send this to users. This is useful when you have things like passwords in your database or tokens for your different users in your auth calls and stuff like that. The blog post does a much better job explaining this than I do. Still experimental, I believe. But the point of Taint is that you can tell the React compiler, hey, by the way, we don't want this part to ever go to the client. So if we have data and then we mark it as a tainted object reference, this cannot go to the user anymore. Theoretically, you could still dump this object, have a new object and return that, but that's a much less likely thing somebody would do. The goal here isn't to be a perfect guaranteed this data will never leak, so much as a method to make it easier to determine within your code base and communicate to the team as well as the compiler, hey, by the way, this doesn't go to the user. This is kind of like the example I was talking about where we have user data, but we don't want them to ever send the token. We might be cool with them sending data, so we could even delete the taint object reference. But if we specifically don't want the token key from this object to go, we could just do this part instead. Very, very useful. If we find a place to sneak that in, we will. But the core thing I wanted to showcase here is the idea of having a separate folder where all of your backend data stuff, both getters and modifiers, so your queries as well as your mutations, having this in one place does make it a lot easier. And having a separate folder means in the future you can add custom lint rules and stuff like that too. So if you're making a real code base, so to speak, I think you should separate out like this sooner rather than later. And I'll almost certainly break this rule as we go, so make sure you make fun of me in the comments for that as well. Let's get this committed. Queries into separate file. Cool. Now we've done that and we have handled auth for the actual file access. we got more fun stuff to do here. Next image will be an interesting change because right now I'm not really doing much in terms of handling widths. Image isn't going to help much though. If you're not already familiar with the Next.js image component, it's honestly kind of magical. I was really skeptical at first, but the more I've used it, the more I understand why it's so powerful. The magic of the next image component isn't like, oh, they reinvented the image tag. It's that the magic of this component isn't like, oh, it's just a better IMG component. It's much deeper than that. The value of this component isn't even on the client side. It's mostly on the server side. What's really cool here is that this component will take the images that you pass to the source tag. And when a user fetches it, depending on how much resolution it needs for their use case, they'll optimize a perfectly minified image for that user. So you can have source data that's massive images, and Sharp on the server side will make sure you don't send a picture bigger than the user actually needs. This is super important. And if you look at something like image.t3.gg, a lot of the images I have here are super high res, but the version on the site isn't. And if I zoom in, you'll see it's actually a little bit pixelated. That's not something I coded or set myself. That's just the default behavior with next image. Because at a normal resolution, you won't notice. But if I command plus this a bunch, it'll actually start fetching higher res versions automatically based on how much space the image is actually taking up on my screen. Literal magic. This stuff it makes a project like this actually viable. Rather than having to optimize and make 15 versions of every image yourself, this just generates them when the user actually needs them. Obviously, this does cost money once you hit a certain amount of usage on Vercel. So if we go to Vercel, pricing, image optimization, I don't want you guys to think I'm rug pulling you. On the hobby tier, you get 1,000 images per month of optimization for free. On the pro tier, you get up to 5,000 for free. And then it's not free, you're paying the monthly fee, but then you get another 1,000 images optimized for $5. You can use other services if you're interested. I believe Cloudinary is a little bit cheaper, but honestly, it's pretty hard to beat the built-in stuff here. So I'm just going to use that. So first and foremost, we need to switch this to image. We'll notice that there are some props that are unhappy. The easiest way to fix that, because again, like this component needs to be able to know some amount of how big it's going to be in order for it to get the right image size for your display. So you can't just drop it and let the container figure it out, unless you literally tell it to do that, which we'll do here by putting fill. Actually, they changed the right thing to do here. So we'll change this quickly to, what is it? It's object fit, I believe. And we also need an alt tag, which honestly, I'm happy they made this required because it should be required. Well, now we have object fit as fill, alt is image name. And this is the error I was expecting. Well, one of the few errors I would be expecting. It's missing the required with property. That means that the object fit fill was not the right value. If we go to the docs for this, I can just command F for fill, or just scroll a little bit. Oh, it's style object fit now. They changed it. I forgot about that. I knew they had changed it. I just forgot what they had changed it to. Contains probably the right name for that because we wanted to make sure it uses the right amount of the parent container. Now if we go back here, and then I just need fill as well. I was so sure I had that right the first time. Haha. Here's the other error that I was trying to get. This error is a bit different. Now that we have told the component, hey, by the way, fill the space you have and make sure the image contains and fits within it, we need to tell the next config, hey, this is one of the URLs we're cool with optimizing images from. If you don't do this, then theoretically, anyone could throw any image from any source into your app and you would just blindly optimize it, which could potentially be a security issue. It could be really expensive. It could result in people abusing your service. So we want to specify only uploadthing URLs are allowed to be optimized. Actually telling Next.js to optimize for our URL, which is in this case UTF-SIO, is not too annoying. I don't love the syntax, but it's totally fine. We have an images key. It's remote patterns is the new name for this array. This has to be an array. The actual stuff you care about, which in this case, hostname, utfs.io. And that's all we need to do here. Now, those images will be optimizable. Next.js is now aware that we are cool with allowing images that come from uploadthing with being used. We run dev again because I accidentally killed it earlier. And now this loaded. You'll notice the pictures are not quite taking up the right amount of space. You should probably figure out what's going on there. I have a couple guesses. If I comment out object fit contain, how do we do that? Nope. Seems like the width here isn't enough, that we also have to have a height. Still looks like it is not happy placing this image inside of there. There is a couple easy fixes. Can't have fill and a minimum or manually set width like that. Ta-da! Look at that. Not bad at all. It's probably a little closer to the pixel value here. I'll just do the 192. Just make it a little closer to matching. That's a little bit jank when it like pops in and isn't quite sure. Be nice to be able to fix that. Honestly, the best way to fix that would be to have like a fixed size that all of these boxes are so that you always have the same height, even if certain elements are taller or shorter. Because if I was to add one taller picture here, it would change the height of the whole row right now, which is not ideal. This is a totally fine starting point, but there's a lot of little polish we can do here. One other thing that's kind of driving me mad right now. It's not centered. There we go. That makes me feel so much better. Cool. But now we're using the image component. Now all of these images are optimized. And if we scroll in, zoom in, you'll see it's a lot more blurry, which might seem like a bad thing. But since when we're zoomed out, it's totally fine. This is actually a great thing because the amount of data the client needs to fetch to use these images is significantly less. And also, if we take a look at the source here, if we inspect and look at the image, we'll see the URL for it is no longer just the UTF-SIO. It's some crazy stuff with a /_next/image question mark with the URL parameter. The reason for that is this is allowing our server to make the image on the fly. Now that we have that done, we are one more step completed. Next up, we're adding Sentry. I just want to commit the changes, use next image, push that. Now let's set up erroring, because as you guys saw that time, I ran into quite a few errors. And if we run into those in production, it'd be really nice to know. The beauty of something like Sentry is that it's surprisingly easy to set up and you get awesome feedback when errors happen in your application. The setup is much better than it used to be. Making something as important as this work well, that integrates on every piece of your front end and your back end, is difficult, and they put a lot of time into making Sentry a great solution for this. There is a tiny bit of bad news, which I'll just jump in front of now, which is that at the time of recording, Turbo is not compatible with Sentry, which only matters in dev. So I'm temporarily deleting the -- turbo in the dev command so that when we do this, it will actually work when we're testing it locally. We'll add the turbo command back after because we don't care if we get errors locally. We only care in production, and production builds don't use turbo yet. But for dev, I like using turbo. So let's just turn that off for now. Hop in here. We see an old project that I was testing with before, but that's not the one I want to care about. So if you're not already signed in and set up with Sentry, pretty easy to sign in and make an account. Go get that done. Where things start to matter is we want to create a new project. So we go here. They even have a fancy little Next.js button. Click that, create project. This is also an important thing to set. This is a side project. I don't want them to spam me with stuff. So I'm just going to click, I'll create my own alerts later. If you want them to spam me, which could be really nice as like a PagerDuty type thing, really handy to have that. You also can have a threshold for how many errors you want to occur before you get notified. So if you have a popular service and you want to make sure like, hey, if 5 people get this error, let me know. So you can say occurrences. So if this error happens 10 times, notify me, or if 10 users are affected. That's such a nice toggle. These are the little things that like when Sentry's been around for so long that they're able to build and do. And I'm really pumped they were willing to work with us to make this all possible. So let's do T3 gallery video. You can name this whatever you want. I'm just naming it that because it'll help me keep track of it. Now we're going to run the Sentry wizard. This is so cool. It's so cool that I actually plan on stealing it and copying it for uploadthing because of just how much easier it makes doing something like this. We're just going to copy and paste the command, npx Sentry wizard at latest. You have uncommitted or untracked. We do. Get status. Oh yeah, the turbo change. Git commit gem temp disable turbo. Cool. Paste that now. How do we want to use Sentry? Another one of the cool parts of Sentry is that the code is all out there for you to use. You can set up the Sentry backend yourself if you want to. It's not open source in the traditional, like you can go fork it and sell it yourself sense, but they are using the functional software license, the FSL, which theoretically should allow you to use all of their source code if you're just willing to wait 2 years for when the specific commit you want to use was made. So you can host this yourself and have a great experience, but obviously I'm lazy. We'll be using Sentry directly. Do we already have a Sentry account? Yes. And here it goes right to your browser, authenticates for you, tells you to return to your terminal. That's so nice. Pick the project you want to link here. Now we're installing. Do you want to create an example page? Yes. Again, very handy. Their whole thing is they're tracking errors for us. So wouldn't it be nice if they showed us a page where we can force an error and actually make sure it all works? Another cool part here, are you using a CI/CD tool? We probably should have set up GitHub Actions before this, but we didn't. Here's an environment variable token. I'm just going to grab this now because it's easier to have it now rather than deal with it later. So hop down here, hop into .env, paste, save. Now we have that for when we need it later. Do not commit to the repository. Yep, we know that. Cool. Now this is all done. We have Next.dev and the Sentry example page all set up properly. Theoretically, fingers crossed, this should all work as expected. So now if we rerun our project, because that got killed while we were doing that, npm dev, what is it mad about? Oh, this is one of the other annoying things that they do. It's a somewhat easy fix, just annoying. So we've already been working inside of our Next config, and we're using ESM syntax where we're doing proper traditional imports. Their expectation is that you're still using a CJS or old school Next config. So they use require and module exports. This is somewhat easy to fix, but we have to actually do it. So above this export, we already have our config that we made, but we need to use these new things. So import with Sentry config from Sentry Next.js. And here we want to make the new config. So I could name this core config. So we know this is like the top level, like these are the things that we defined ourselves. But now we want to have the actual main config be the thing that's wrapped. So with Sentry config, and here's where you put all those other values. I'll just do that for now. I'll hop down here and I'm going to grab all of this, delete the rest. And now I'm going to paste that right here. Cool. So now we have all of the config that they added, just using this different syntax, no more requires, still exporting it as a default. This all should work as expected. There's a couple other really cool things they snuck in here, like tunnel routes. The value here is that certain providers of things like analytics and like error handling tend to be blocked by ad blockers. A lot of companies that make ad blockers, well, I shouldn't say companies, a lot of developers who make ad blockers aren't just against ads, they're against tracking as a whole. And it's not uncommon for them to block anything that resembles tracking, be it error reporting, be it product analytics, be it a feedback form. They'll just block the things they go to. And they do that by blocking the whole domain like Sentry or like Posthog, which we'll get to later. The tunnel route is a really handy trick where it will run the traffic through /monitoring on your URL. And then on your server, it's going to rewrite this traffic to point somewhere else, in this case, Sentry. So it's much harder to ad block these types of things because they exist on your domain. So you can't block it via URL. You have to block it via path. And if you use this URL for anything else, it all falls apart. So really handy that you could do something like this to make sure you still get your errors, even if a user's using an ad block. So now we have all this set up, we actually go see it. So let's npm dev, homepage still works. But that's not the page we want to test here. The page we wanted to test is our new Sentry example error page.jsx, also gross.jsx. We'll fix these and make them TSX in a minute. Just needed to get this started. It's already mad at us for not having a TypeScript file. Let's shut up Copilot. And we see in here, we have a basic Sentry onboarding, yada, yada. The important piece is down here, we have a button where we on-click sentry.startSpan. This is us wrapping our thing that we're going to do, which is in this case is a fetch, so that if an error happens within here, it gets caught as part of this Sentry event. So here we throw the new error, Sentry example frontend error, because we're fetching from an endpoint that doesn't exist. We never made /API/Sentry example API. If we did, this would pass, but since we didn't, we're going to throw an error. So if we go to this URL, which is Sentry example page, so just /Sentry-example page, we'll see this fancy fun new page where we can throw an error. And we see we got this error here, but I don't care about the error here. What I care about is the error here. If we hop back to the T3 gallery project, you'll see error, Sentry example frontend error. This is an error that just happened 13 seconds ago because we clicked that button. How cool is that? That with like 2 terminal commands and a little bit of moving things around in a config, we now have the ability for all the errors in our app to get hydrated up to Sentry. It makes debugging significantly easier. They also will track source maps since we set up build. So it will show you the exact line of code in the exact place in your code base, which is just mind blowing. It is so cool to have it at that level. And once you've linked it to GitHub, you can click a button and it will bring you straight to that thing inside of GitHub. Whew. So cool. They even have little replays that they'll show you. So here's the replay of what the user experienced, and you can see they click the button, they get the error. Also, all the text is censored by default, which is really nice. It makes it much less likely that you get personal information that you shouldn't have access to. But we can see what they did and at the error that they got, as well as a whole stack trace of all the things that happened there. Pretty nice. I know that I slept on Sentry for a long time. We ended up needing it for a bunch of the stuff that we've been building lately and all the complex user experiences that we've been working on at Ping. Having a tool like this is essential, and I'm really pumped that we now are working with the best one. So that was hilariously easy. I'm going to delete the Sentry example page because I don't need that anymore, but I do want to tidy up the global error a tiny bit because I don't want a non-TS file in my code base. I'm sure y'all understand. So we're going to rename this to .tsx, but now we're getting type errors because we don't know what error is or really anything about this just yet. So I have a slight change. I don't love the syntax of just having your objects dumped in your function. It's fine, just not my thing. So instead we're going to do props, which has the type error _unknown because we don't know what the error is. So calling it unknown is the most realistic way to describe it. Now we need to change these 2 calls so that we're not just calling error directly. It's props.error. And here we're actually seeing a type error we weren't getting before, which is that the error component from Next has specific expectations that aren't being met. So it is missing status code. So ideally, we would know based on the specific error we got what type of status code to throw. We could throw like a 404, we could throw a 500. There's a lot of different things we can throw. I'll let the autocomplete do its thing. Status code 500, title error. Cool. Now we got the default Next.js error view with the status code and the title, and we are capturing this error and sending it to Sentry before we do anything else. So this makes it much more likely that we actually get the error data when users have issues. And as I mentioned before, this is not being blocked because of the fancy stuff we did there with the rewrites. So you're basically guaranteed to get that error data when a user has an issue. I think this is really cool. So with that all said, we are now done setting up our error management. And now we get to go cause a lot of errors because this parallel routing stuff is both incredible and kind of hard to do. I'm going to demo it first, and then we're going to build it. Next.js parallel routes. Look at that. I already have the docs here. I know they have an example. I'm going to lean on Lee Rob a bit because he made a really nice example showcasing just how cool these parallel routes are. I'll be sure linked to this linked in the description. So right now we're just on the basic Next.gram Vercel app URL. When I click one of these, it opens in a modal, which is pretty typical behavior, the way that Instagram, Twitter, all these other platforms work, except the URL changed. So what happens when I refresh? This is where this pattern gets really cool because it works just like Twitter. This is its own page. That way I can send this to somebody and it works, or I can refresh or close my browser and open it. This will behave with an actual useful page. Because technically, if we had made 100 other images and 2 wasn't visible here anymore, and that URL was expected to go to the home page with this as a modal, that might not work. But this also lets us have the good product experience of clicking it and having it come up on top of our current context without having to go to another place. It's a kind of niche pattern, but it's a niche pattern that I've seen used in so much shit that it makes a lot of sense for a project like this. So we're going to be borrowing a lot of the cool things that Lee did here. All the source code is available because, of course, it is meant to be a demo, and we'll be borrowing a decent bit from it. So the first thing we need to deal with is this @modal thing. This might seem confusing, and it kind of is. It's one of those weird things where we're putting things in folder names and those magically become accessible values in Next. And I also want to be clear, this is more of a Next thing than it is a React thing. So other frameworks will have their own weird equivalents of this. React does not prescribe anything for this. It's a cool thing that the app router added. So if we go to the pages here, we'll see the page is kind of boring. We just have link, the ID, stuff like that. The modal thing is more important in the layout. You'll see here that the root layout doesn't just have children anymore. It also has modal, and it kind of puts it in the body here. We can just copy this for now. So I'll grab that, hop over to our code base, go to layout. Remember, we're in the layout right now. Paste that because it's an additional value, modal here. And now if we want to use this, we can just put it right below children and modal. Nice and easy. The modal root's also a really nice thing to have, which I'll sneak in here. It gives you a thing to target and mount elements. So this will make life quite a bit easier as we get to that point. But now we actually need to make that modal directory in order for this to do anything. What's it mad about with modal here? Modal is not a valid layout prop? You're bullshitting. Root layout, props, children, modal. Oh yeah, the next type definitions are really smart. So if I make a folder @modal, is that enough to get it to shut up? It is. Yes, it is. How cool is that? I just made a new folder and it fixed the type definitions. They are getting better about this. I need to stop talking as much shit as I do. Cool. So the first thing we need in the modal is a default state. I know you don't really need defaults in much of the other stuff here, but the point of the default is to allow for Next to always render whatever the @modal is, even if you don't have content for it. So in here, we're going to do default.tsx, export default, function default modal, return null. And now that we have a default, we can actually get to work. So let's hop over here, take a look at the rest of the modal code. We have .photos/ID. I will not pretend this is a good folder name, but this is app router being app router. This is a bit of why I'm not the biggest fan of doing everything through file names, but the power of what this enables is honestly incredible. So we have the .photos, we have the /ID folder. The use of the brackets here is to indicate to Next that the thing between the brackets is now a variable that we have access to. So if we have the page.tsx here, this is just rendering a modal, which is in the directory right there. Just yet, we're just going to copy the page.tsx for now. Page.tsx, paste. The modal. So I'm going to change this to just a div for now. And we have the ID. Oh, cool. One other thing, I don't love this being named photo, so I am going to rename this just to image, like IMG, because I think it's a better name. We also need, I don't think we actually need anything else. Do we need default up top? No, we don't. Cool. We now have all of the essential pieces for this to render. We actually need to get it to render. So what do we do for that? Again, here's where the magic of the new Next stuff really kicks in. We wrap this with a link tag. We'll use the actual Next link because then it will route on the client side. Link, cool. That's wrong, but we can work with it. And I can put the other side of this link tag below. The important piece here is that we are just going straight to /image/image.id. And in here, we're just going to render the ID below. So theoretically, when we click one of these, it should add a new element to the page that has that ID in it. So let's go see if this works. Hop over to the app. We'll click one of these images. And if it works all proper, then we should have the ID, which in this case is 10, appear below the current page content. So we click here, a 10 appears. Click here, a 7 appears. This might seem trivial, but it is really cool that we're on this same page, even though the URL changed. And if we refresh, it'll be different content, except we haven't actually made the page for that yet. So we can do that really quick for now. The easiest thing to do, so I'm just going to copy the image ID there. We'll paste it And we don't want the dot because we don't want to tell it like, hey, go up an element, which is what we were doing before because we wanted it to escape the @modal container. So if we delete that, we'll no longer be doing that. We have image, ID, page. Same content for now, totally fine. It's just going to render the photo ID. If we refresh, it's just 8. We go back to the home page and we have all the page content again. We click one of these, it shows up there. And if I refresh, it becomes a full page. If I go back, this all navigates and behaves as you would expect. I think this is really cool. I'm so pumped that this is part of Next, even if I don't love the syntax for some of these folder names. The ability to define a key with that @ syntax that is now accessible in the layout lets you do some really cool stuff. Another way to think of this is when you have a page TSX, that becomes the children of the current layout. When you have something like @modal or @chat, @help, or whatever else you want to have like this, whatever is in here goes in the modal tag, or whatever other tag that you have. This lets you define custom alternatives to children that the layout has access to. But now we want to actually do something with this because right now we're just rendering an ID. First, we need to actually get the info for the image. So we need to hop back over to our query file, queries.ts, and we need to export a function to handle this. Oh, look at that. That was some really smart auto-completing. Why is this matter with the EQ? Because ID is not a string, it's a number? That is why. Cool. I'll explain this line by line because me just auto-completing the code and forcing you to type, it's no fun. We are awaiting db.query.images.find first because we only want one image this time. We don't want to find all of the images. We just want to find one. We want to find the one where, using model as like the comparison, EQ, where the model ID is equal to the ID that we passed here. If no image, throw a new error, return image. If we really wanted to, we could do an additional auth check here and also make sure that not only are the IDs for the image equal, but the user's allowed to access this thing. It's actually another fun thing we can do here for that. We'll just do this because again, everything should be safe. We have the user, we have the image, we have, if there's no image, we throw. If there's no user ID, we throw. Honestly, we should do this check first so that we don't have to worry about it. Cool. And if there's no image, we throw. So now we know there's a user and there's an image. So our last check is if, look at that, if image.user ID does not equal to user ID, that we throw an error unauthorized. And now we just return the image. So as long as all of that code works, which simple enough, it probably should, we can hop into, we'll start with the modal. But remember, we have to write this code in 2 places because we want this to render both on the page as well as in this modal that we're going to have up here. So in here, we actually need the image. Make this async. Const image equals await get image. Have to import that. This is params.photo ID. Oh no, we don't even have it. We just have photo ID here. Sadly, photo ID is a string because we're getting it from the URL. So we need to turn this into a number. So const ID as num. That's fine. And we can make sure it's not nan. Drop that here. And now we have the image. I'm going to be lazy and just poorly render this as an image tag with a source, and we'll do style, or I'll class name because I'm lazy, equals W96, I think. Pretty big. Yeah, we'll go with 96 for now. And now when I click one of these, a giant image appears below. We don't want it below. We want it to be a modal, but as a starting point, this is really good. Hopefully this pattern is starting to click because it honestly took me a little bit. So don't feel bad if this is a little harder to follow than the rest of the tutorial so far. There's a lot of weirdness to this. And if you really want to understand it, check out the full parallel routing docs in the Next docs. If you really don't like this or you don't care for the URL patterns I was showing earlier, you can also do this with a state management library like Zustand and just render things when they're in your state. I actually did that for a version I was working on before. It was totally fine, but I think this pattern's cool enough that I wanted to show it off. So I think this is important enough progress that I'm choosing to commit it now. So if I was working on a real project, I certainly would have made a branch for this feature and committed to that first. Did I forget to add Sentry via Git first? I am so silly. That is a little bit annoying. I'm going to go out of my way to... This was a dumb mistake. This is why I recommend committing all the time. I absolutely should have committed the Sentry stuff first and then done this later. If I was being perfect here, I would manually stash or go temporarily remove all of the things I changed for the layout stuff. But I just want this tutorial to be good. So we're just going to commit this all together. Git add -a, git commit -m. I want to be very clear in this commit message that I accidentally did 2 things. So add Sentry and start implementing parallel routes. Typing is hard, okay? Now that's committed. Nice. I actually spent quite a bit of time trying to hunt for a nice minimal modal component, and I was a little horrified at how bad most of them were. So instead of fighting all that, I'm going to start with the one Lee made here, and we'll make some slight adjustments as we go, but it's a good enough starting point. So I'm again in the Next.gram code base, app, @modal, photos, ID, modal.tsx. I'm just going to click the raw button, copy. Technically, I think I could have clicked this button to copy the content. I'll do that instead. Same difference. We're going to go back here. For now, we just want the modal here, so I don't care to separate it into another place. If we wanted to be proper and we also wanted to use modal other places, I'd put it in a components folder higher up, modal.tsx. paste, save. Let's just test this as is and see what it looks like. It's not going to look good, but at least it will look. Paste, import, save, go back to our app, click something, and look at that. We have a nice little modal of our image right in the middle of the page. That was hilariously easy. He even bound the escape button for us. So I'm just pressing the escape key to close these things, and it really is that easy to make them go away. This is a good starting point, but we want it to look better. So let's get this customized. Before we do that though, brief story time. You might have noticed that I look a little different. That's because I'm recording this for like the 4th or 5th time now, a few weeks later. The reason for that is because this kind of sucked. I'd previously sketched out this project and I had a fix working for the dialogue to make it full screen properly, but I lost it. And the result was chaos trying to debug. I have a whole video about this that we already published, but I don't want to waste time on the details. I just want to show you the problem and how I solved it really quick. So let's hop over to our actual modal. So we'll open this up again and you'll see in here that we have the class modal backdrop class modal. I want the dialogue to be the main element and I want to be able to fill it up with like things inside of it. So let's make some quick changes so we can do that. We're going to just delete that outer layer because we don't need it. The dialogue is our top layer. Modal isn't really a thing, so we don't need to give that class name. Let's just give it W screen, H screen, and a color so we know that this is going right. So now when we go back here and we click something, we'll see it's here, but it's not quite going to the edges. It has some space around the dialogue. If we quickly inspect and we select the element, you'll see it has this margin 19 across everything. So let's just get rid of that. M0. Nope, it just shifts it up to the side. So it's now properly top left, but now it has this 38 pixel space on the bottom and the right and no indication of a margin or border anywhere in here. So what the hell is going on? Well, if we scroll down here, you'll see there's a max height and width set that are really strange. If we go to where they come from, max width and max height are set as a default style by the browser at calc 100% minus 2em minus 6 pixels. Just, yeah, real bad. So the best way to fix that, honestly, is to just throw it in the global styles. I hate doing this, but it's a part of the reset that didn't get included effectively. So we're going to select all dialogues, and on dialogues, we're going to set max width to 100 VW and max height to 100 VH. Perfect. Look at how smart that autocomplete is. And now, if we open this up again, it's properly full screen now. Nice, right? Now we can actually get styling this. So first off, we don't want that to be BG red 200. Let's give this a nice gray. Let's do BG zinc 900 over 50. The slash syntax there is to add in like opacity. So this is 50% opacity now, which actually looks pretty nice. This is obviously in the wrong place when we have a lot of work to do here, but it's a good starting point. But now when I go to one of these and I refresh, this is entirely different from the page that we just were working on. We want to make that reusable. So we need to make a place to put reusable components. We have the underscore components here, but as I mentioned, I like to use these for things that are specific to the route, just to keep the routing clear. And since the top nav only is used in layout, I like it being there. But if we want something that's going to be reused across the code base, that's when making a components folder starts to make a lot of sense. So let's do components / full image page.tsx. And for now, I'm just going to yank the contents out of page.tsx and make some quick changes. Obviously, we don't need this to be in the modal because not every instance of it's going to have a modal. And honestly, this shouldn't have params because params are when it's part of the route and this isn't part of the route. So I'm going to do my preferred definition here, which is props image, or we'll still call it photo ID string. It's not going to be a string though. It's going to be a number because these are number IDs. So props is a photo ID of type number. You can even change that to just be ID, since it's the full page image view. This is the full page image view. When you pass an ID, it's assumed that's going to be an ID for this, so I don't think we need to specify any further. But here we go. It's that simple. Now we just await the image, and then we return it. We need to make sure we're actually using this, though. So let's hop back to our page TSX here. We still want to render the modal, remember. We're going to change this to be full page image view. ID is number. And we don't need to do this await here, which means we don't need this async here either. Kill all of that. And this should be reusable and look the exact same as it did before. Cool, that looks the same. But now if I grab this guy, in fact, I can just grab all of the contents here. We hop over to the image route page TSX. So remember, we want these to be as similar as possible effectively. Rename this from photo modal to photo page. Delete the modal because we don't want to use that. And now this just renders the full page image view directly. So now when I click this, it'll render that there. And when I refresh, it renders that as the page content on this page. Great stuff. I think this would be worth committing. So I'm going to, remember how I said I was re-recording? Ignore that. Let's add that. Commit this as fixed dialog full screen made component for image view. Fantastic. So let's actually work on the layout of this now. What I'm thinking is we'll have the image on the left side and then the info about it on the right side. If you've ever seen an image selected full screen on Twitter, this should be pretty similar. This is what I mean, by the way. So on Twitter, when I select an image and I have it open, you have the image on the left side here, and you have the side nav on the right that has the info. In this case, the info is my tweet, but for our app, the info is going to be the name of the image, when it was uploaded, who uploaded it, all of these other types of things. So let's get to work on getting that all set up. Quick pro tip in case anyone somehow doesn't know it, if you command click a component or anything like that that's imported, it'll bring you to where it came from, which makes it really easy to hop around things like that. So now that we're here, we need a lot more than just an image tag. I will advise using the standard img image instead of next image here, because next image does a lot of preloading with fake elements in order to try and take up the right amount of space. We don't even know the size of the image because the user uploaded it. So it's a tough catch-22 with trying to implement the next image component the right way here. So I would personally recommend just using the img tag. If anybody wants to file a pull request on the repo that makes this work properly with next image, bonus points for that. So let's start working on this layout. Obviously, we want to wrap this in a div because now we have a place to actually control the layout. So this should obviously be a flex. Love that autocomplete, but it's not quite what I'm looking for. So we're going to type this one out ourselves. Class name equals flex, w full. And honestly, since this is going to be a bit complex, let's give this a background just to know that it's working how we expect it to. So now that we have the BG green, we can see it's taking up the right horizontal amount, but not the right vertical amount because we didn't do H full. Again, certain things don't hot reload, right? Oh, I guess that was hot reloading, right? It's just stretching it weird. So we need to give the image a bit more information because the flex box is causing it to vertically flex, take up all of its space. Object contain should fix that. Yeah, object contain will fix that, so the image won't get bigger than it's supposed to. I am seeing that we're able to scroll a bit though. If I recall, there was something in the modal that we never applied CSS to that I think we should probably just get rid of. So if we hop in here, we'll see the delete button or close button. I'm just gonna get rid of that guy for now to make sure that, yep, that fixes the scroll behavior because we were defining the sizing, like the full width and height in the child here. So the button would have to be somehow made accessible other ways. Honestly, we'll figure this out later. And right now, just pressing the escape key is fine, but problem for later. So now we have this looks correct. And when I refresh, we go here where it is not quite correct. I think that might actually require a page level layout change, but won't be too bad to figure it out. So now we should actually work on the layout of this full page image component. So we want to have that side nav. So we'll div, honestly, the width should probably be on this because we would want the side nav to have a specific width rather than the image. The image should take up whatever space is available. This should just be a specific size. One of my favorite Tailwind things is to just pick a number that you think feels and looks about right and then adjust up or down until you find the one that's the right fit. Tailwind has a default spacing scale that they use for pretty much everything where you only have access to certain numbers. You'll notice up to here, it's pretty consistent, but then we skip 13, then we skip 15, then we skip 17, 18, 19. The point here is to make a system where you're using the same general padding sets, so everything fits together much better. And honestly, the spaces between these things are rarely needed. I should say needed. This is more like a design decision that was made with Tailwind. It's one of the few things that makes it less just CSS and more a library that has a design system within it. But I like it a lot because it lets you just use these different names that map to the size or pixels. And over time, I've stopped thinking in terms of the 1 rem or 16 pixels, and I just think in the 4 or the 8 of Tailwind, which is really nice. And I find myself going to this page to figure out which spacing I'm using more often than I would like to admit. But obviously, this all exists in the tooltip here too. You can see width 12 rem, it's there. You have all this information right where you need it. So we'll start with width 48. This also should be a flex and a flex column specifically because we want this to be vertical column. And in here, we can start applying other things. Well, that's pretty bold of them to assume that I want text XL font bold for this and the image name. That is correct though. So here we now have the image name and all that additional information. Let's see if that rendered correctly. Hop over here. Look at that, Apple USA. Sadly, I set the width here, but it's still taking up a lot of space, partially because we left the width 96 there. But now it's taking up too much space. There's a couple reasons for that. This is the wonderful min width chaos. If we set min w0 there and we set flex shrink here, now it will shrink accordingly. And if we go back, well, it should have. Why did not shrink accordingly? You know, it is partially working because the green doesn't go any further because we have that set here with the w full, h full, min width 0. But this guy is not flexing properly. Honestly, when I run things like this, usually I'll class name equals flex shrink on a div on the outside because I find divs to behave better than images in most cases. And we're probably gonna wanna do more things here anyways. And then on this side, flex shrink 0 to make it clear that we never want that to shrink. And look at that, we're now good. And in both layouts too. And here it works. And when I refresh to go to this layout, it works as well. You might previously have noticed how often I was refreshing when I made a change. The reason for that was the next version I recorded most of the tutorial in had an annoying bug where hot reloading was broken, where I would make a change and save, and if I had one of these like parallel routes, it would switch the one I was on to the other type. The bug has since been fixed. You might notice it for the rest of the tutorial. In fact, I did a little blurb about it, but for the sake of the part that I'm re-recording here, I did actually just bump the next version up to the latest, which at this point is 14.2.1, and that bug went away, which has made working in this and debugging it much easier. I'm actually thankful that all of you won't have that problem because writing this with that bug was very, very annoying. Thanks to the Next team for getting that one fixed. Anyways, we probably don't need that background green anymore. And if I delete that and save it, you'll see we stay in the right route. We might also have noticed that our global styles aren't applying because the dialog element exists outside of where those styles are being applied. If we go back to our global layout, you'll see that we're putting font sans and all these other things in the body. And if we go to our default styles, we're applying to the body BG black, text white. Sadly, this doesn't apply to the dialog. Dialog has its text reset. So we could do the simple thing here, or we could go apply it in the modal. There's a lot of places to put it. Honestly, I think for the sake of clarity, especially since in here we're also setting the BG color, text white, probably best put there. And there we go. The text is now white for Apple USA. And when I refresh, it still brings us to this route. Cool stuff. There's a lot of little things here I want to fix. First, I want to make sure this image is down center, so it's like in the middle properly, rather than like push all the way up to the top. I want to add some borders on the side here. I want to add additional metadata here as well. All things that are relatively easy to do. Let's get started with those changes. So pretty much done with the modal. Won't have to touch that for a while at least. We have more work to do in here. As I was saying, I want to make this centered in the middle here. There's a couple ways to do that. This would have to be a flex box for that to work. So flex, justify, center, items, center. That should do it. Yeah, look at that. We now have the image nice and centered. I still want that side nav though, so let's do that. Well, the side border. Borders are so nice and simple to do in Tailwind. Just border dash L. So we need to fix the fact this isn't taking up the vertical height. It will make debugging and working on the rest of this going forward much easier. And also, I haven't shown this yet, but if we were to fill the homepage with more stuff, it would break the way the layout works a bit. What I want is for this to scroll without the whole page scrolling. So we can have the top nav on top and have all of this stuff in the rest of the page. But I also want this to be full screen. We could brute force this with some crazy Flexbox hacks, but honestly, this is when grid comes in really handy. So I'm going to commit what we have now first off. So git status, git add p. You see, I still have the next change in here. So I'm just going to git add those first. Package.json, pnpm lock YAML. Cool. So those are added. Let's pick for the rest. Fix the text, fix that, fix the border, more cleanup on modal. Cool. Now that we have that done, let's fix the root layout. First, we want to delete all of the flex stuff because we're not going to be using flex here anymore. Next, this is just a general pro tip. Having a separate div that includes all of these things makes life much easier. I've had some weird things where certain JavaScript libraries try to drop stuff in body. And if you have a grid setup, it can break the whole page layout. So doing all of this in a div that's full size makes this much easier. I've also chosen to keep the modal outside of said div just to, again, keep it from being part of the core layout. Here's where we have to actually apply the classes equals. First, we want this to be hscreen because it's going to be the full screen space and nothing more or less. So we want it to actually define grid, and we're going to give it the config, which we want to configure the rows. And this is being auto-completed correctly because it's a pretty common config of auto and then 1FR. The syntax is weird, I know, but I promise you normal grid syntax is even weirder. The simplest way of explaining this is we have 2 rows. One, the first row is auto, which means whatever space it decides to take up, it's going to take up. The next section is 1FR, which stands for 1 fraction. If we had multiple of these, like I did 1FR, 1FR, 2FR, then what would happen here is whichever of these commands a height would become 1 fraction height. So if this one has a height of 20 set, and none of the others do, then this will now also have a height of 20, and then the 2FR one will have a height of 40. So this is the configuration within a grid. Highly recommend like the CSS Tricks How Grid Works article if you want to learn more about this. But for now, we want the first thing to just auto scale because we set a height in top nav. And we want the second thing, which is the rest of the page, to be 1FR, which is 1 fraction. Now we want to actually give this the stuff that it should have, which in all of our pages, we'd want this to be main. So we'll wrap this with the main tag quick. We also need to handle the scrolling case. So we can do that here too with class name equals overflow y scroll. So now we did this all correctly and we go back to our home page. That all looks good. Let's quickly make it so there's way more images so we can more meaningfully test this. Do my favorite trick. And now go back here, we have that. And the top stays while the bottom scrolls. And if we did this right and we go to the page, it's now the proper full height. Ta-da. Grid is confusing. I'm not going to sit here and pretend otherwise, but when it works, it's so nice. And I hope this gives you a little bit more confidence with it. One last little thing I see is that this is a little close to the top. That same padding was the padding that was causing the gap in this page. So I want to handle that, but still have padding here. Quickest way to fix that is to hop into our page. And instead of just the gap forks, the gap applies to things inside of this container. Let's do PT. We want padding on the bottom too. We want padding on every direction. Theoretically, if the images were constrained on the sides, that'd be bad. So we'll just give this P4 for everything. And now when we scroll to the bottom, there's a little more wiggle room and there's room on the left and right. If it was getting really close to the edges, that's better in every way I could think of. So let's absolutely commit that. Git commit -m move to grid. Cool. Let's get back to fixing that layout up. With 48's a bit small for all the things we're going to be including here, and the text XL is honestly a little bit big. Let's go back over to full image page. I'm going to close all my other tabs because this is the only one I'm really working in right now. Change this to text LG. I don't actually love the font bold either, so let's kill that. Let's give it a border on the bottom so that it has its own little section, and text center. So the text is in the middle. Look at that. I'll give it a bit of padding. We'll do P2. Look at that. Doesn't that look nice? Super simple, clean, clear. I'm happy with that so far. Let's get a bit more info in here so this can look nice and clean and actually be useful. So we want this all in the same flex for the column on the right side, but we want it to be separate. I'm gonna be real lazy here and put a gap. We'll just do gap 2 for now. Now let's make these additional elements. We'll do div uploaded by. It would probably be easier to have this be its own little contained bit. So I'll do that. Class name equals flex call. Span. So we're going to want to style these differently, almost certainly. But I also just realized we don't know who this was uploaded by. We don't have their info. Or do we? Well, we have the image and we know what we have from here. If I look here, we have the user ID for the image. So let's get more info on them. And remember, this might not be the user who's currently signed in. If you decided to allow anyone to go to a specific images page, if you share the image or share, I don't know, make an album in the future, we need to know that we actually have the info for the person that did the upload, not the one who's looking at it. So we can't just call auth. We have to call Clerk client. Const uploader info equals await Clerk client dot users dot get user. And here you have to pass the ID. So image.userid. And now we have uploader info, and I can use that. So they might not have a name. They have a full name though. So we'll just use that. Uploaded by Theo Brown. Nice. We need padding though. I'm gonna be lazy with it. px2, that gives it enough room. Perfect. And if I copy paste that, yeah, that is enough space. I'd like there to be a little more space between these, and honestly, we could get rid of the gap if we did it too. So instead of px2, we'll just change it to p2, and I'm gonna get rid of the gap to keep the top spacing the same. Nice. That actually looks good. Obviously, we don't want to put uploaded by twice. So we'll do, I guess, created on. Also don't love the colon, honestly. So we're going to get rid of that too. So let's make a nice formatted created on. Temporal hasn't shipped yet. We can let autocomplete do its thing because new date image.created@toLocale string. Nice. I don't really want the whole date time. So we'll do toLocale date string is the one I was looking for. There we go. Created on that, uploaded by Theo. Nice. Coming around to the colons. Let's put them back. Let's take a look at how this looks on the home page too. Looks like it's hard to see the text. We do have like only 90 or 50 opacity, I think. So we probably want to make that background darker, which if you remember, we did in the modal. Yeah, we're at Zinc 950. Honestly, the gray when everything else is black is not going to look great. So I'm thinking we switch back to black and we put a much more strict opacity change there. I did notice that the hot reloading is still a little bit weird, but this looks hilariously better. I'm feeling pretty good about this now. It all looks right. It all works as I would expect. Let's finalize these changes. Let's go into our README and check this as done. Pretty hyped that we can finally do that. Go back over here, git status, git add that, add the BG black change, get the user info and the new rendering. Finalize modal and parallel image routes. Check that out. I should probably go kill the repeat of the data I have on the home page. Nice. And once again, this just works. I should handle the padding for this some amount. And honestly, this element should have padding just to make it so it's not always pushed up against the edges if the page is the right size. Yeah, look at that. I'll commit that. It's a small, dumb thing, but why not? Git add p, add, git commit, add padding back on home page. And I'm going to git push this just so that we can get a fresh build up, make sure everything's working. I'm sure it will be, but just want to confirm that. We also technically don't need this anymore because we're doing things on the route that are dynamic and it knows such, but it is not a bad call when you need this page to load every time for sure to throw this on the page, just to be sure. So let's fix that upload button. Since this is only going to be used in one place, I could throw it in here. And honestly, I'm going to do that. I'll call this simple upload button. The current upload thing component is focused on making your upload button as easy as possible. It's not just focused on customization. You can change a lot about it, but when you want to fully overhaul it, like I do here to just have like a simple little SVG in the corner, that's going to take a bit more work. We are working on a custom hook that will make this much easier. So check the pinned comment with any and all updates to things that have improved since this tutorial was recorded. If there's anything there about upload thing, instead use the gist in the description and we can work with that. Let me go copy the code that I'm going to put in that gist. Also, before the code that you're copying over works, we need to make sure we update the util file for upload thing to actually export the hooks as well. So if we go into utils, upload thing, export const, use upload thing, notice that this is in an object because it's a value that exists within the SDK. Well, within the thing that we're generating. So we're going to generate the React helpers, which we don't necessarily need all of. We actually only want to use upload thing for now. But again, this is the thing that might change. Check the pinned comment. So now we want to generate this helper. So we'll call generate React helpers, which should automatically fetch from our package. We want to pass it the our file router as the type there. And now we have the use upload thing hook. So as promised, here's the gist. You can just click raw, copy, paste, and now we have a great starting point. I'll quickly TLDR what this hook does because the future one's going to be very similar. I use the upload thing hook to actually get this little object that has the start upload call and any other things we want, like in this case, permitted files, because we want to check if you're permitting more than one file to be uploaded. I'm being lazy in just making accept all images. Ideally, you'd be using our metadata for that, which is again, why I'm excited to have this hook. Hopefully by the time this is out, you can just use a custom hook that we're providing, but if not, here you have it. So now we have this, let's actually start working on this component. Function simple upload button. I'm not gonna need any props for this. We could just do this ourselves. Return div button upload. Cool. Let's go switch the button on the top nav so that we actually can see it when it's working. Simple upload button, import that. We are good to go there. And now if we go to the home page, we should see this awful button that says upload. It doesn't do anything. So I actually already made a dumb mistake. If you're wondering how annoying these things are to do right, this should show you why. Again, we're going to make these things easier with upload thing. This actually needs to be an input. And since it's an input, it can't really have body contents, which makes this very annoying. But we actually want to get something to put on this input, which is going to be annoying. First, we're going to label it though, just to make it easier to actually style. So we'll call this upload button, and then we can have label HTML4, upload button. I'm wrong again. It's not label. It's ID. Oops. And now this HTML4 will affect this input. We have to go to type too. So type equals file. And now if we go back here, we have the good old classic, super ugly, choose file, no file chosen. So you need to get rid of all of those styles and fix this. The easiest way to make this go away, because again, we can't really do much beyond custom styles, is to just kill it. Class name equals SR only. Thankfully, when you click the label, it will still trigger the behavior. So we don't have to worry about hiding the input itself because we can just use the label as the thing that describes what we want to do. But we actually need to do the thing we want to do, which we can use our new custom hook for. So const, I'm just going to make an empty object here for now, equals use uploadthing input props. Oh no, we're getting type error. Well, if I do that, we see image uploader autocompletes. We actually want to use the data here. So again, I'm going to control space to see what options we have. Input props. That sounds like what we're looking for. So I'm going to put that over here, drop it in like that. And now, theoretically, I click this and I upload something, it should work. So I just made that center div video. So we're going to try that. Doesn't seem like anything happened, but if I refresh the page, we'll see it did successfully upload. So we should probably make the page refresh itself again. I could go do that in the top level like we were doing in top nav before, but honestly, should the top nav give a shit about what the router is? I don't think so. So I'm going to move this over here where the client stuff should actually be happening. Import use router. Again, make sure this is coming from Next navigation, not Next router. Vercel, please fix. Go back here. We don't need either of these anymore. Hell, we don't even need this to be a use client anymore. How nice is that? Because the client component is much lower down the tree. Generally, I try to make the client components as deep into the tree for React as possible and give them as small and focused a behavior. Just makes it easier to maintain and also means you're sending way less JavaScript to your clients when you don't need to. So here we have the const router is use router. You need to actually use this though. And here's where some of the helper functions I built into this become really, really handy. We also can pass an object, which includes things like on client upload complete, on upload begin, on upload progress, etc. We'll be using all of these, but for now we're just going to use on client upload complete because we want to router.refresh. We don't even care about the response. So I'll delete that. And now if we do another test upload, we just click that. We'll do the random carbon source code I have here, whatever that is. Oh, it did work actually. I was just slow. Oh, because that image was super high res. That's why. Cool. Let's do a less absurdly high res image. How about GHCLI? And oh, did I break it again? No, it was just taking its time. Cool. Yeah, my internet's kind of fried at the moment. But yeah, that worked. We see this one image isn't quite fitting. We'll have to screw with the layout a bit for that. Could be a challenge for you as the viewer, but I'm going to pass on that for now because I'm focused on other things. Speaking of other things, I do not love the upload text. What I really want is a nice little upload SVG. So we're going to do my favorite thing to get little SVGs. We're going to go to hero icons. We'll search what we want, which in this case is upload. And here we have a couple options. One of the really cool things about this page and this site with hero icons is that I can just click copy JSX, go back here, make this something. So function, upload, SVG, turn, paste. And now we have this SVG. And I can go down here and change the content here to be set SVG. Ta-da, we have a real icon finally. But we can do better than that. First, we need to have some space between those two things. So if we go back over to the top nav, we can fix that. We already have these in a div together. So let's just give them a gap. We'll try gap 4 initially. That looks right. We also want to fix the alignment, which would be items center. Cool, now everything is vertically aligned. We have a much nicer little upload button there that we can click and do an upload. But I'm also noticing my cursor isn't changing when I hover over that, even though it does on other things. Obviously, that should have a cursor behavior, which is the last thing we need to change. So we need to class name this. And this would be cursor pointer. Ta-da. Nice and easy. And now we have our own custom upload flow. Wouldn't it be nice to know that something is uploading though? Definitely something we should fix. There's one specific way I like to notify users for stuff like this, and it's a toast. I don't want to go build a whole toast component though. So I'm going to do something I should have done a while ago, which is set up shadcn. So I'm just in the shadcn UI site. I got to it by Googling, but ui.shadcn.com. What we want is the toast, which you might have seen the short of me freaking out over this toast. So if I click this, we get this really fancy, nice, slow pop-up of the toast. Open multiple. Oh, okay. I see why you said to do that. Do you see how good that looks? Oh, God. Yeah. That's really good. I'm sorry. I did not expect that to be that good. But again, this is the benefit of Shadui. Toast. Cool. Let's actually get this implemented. Since we haven't set up any Shadui stuff, we're going to have to configure it, but that is totally fine. So we should run this command to get started. I have a feeling it's not going to work though. I'll show you what I mean in a sec. Pasted, and we need to init. So I'll just paste the command again, but instead of doing add, we're going to do init. You know what? Before we do this, I'm going to do one last thing. Git status. I want to add all the things we just changed in the helper that we generated because the addition of Shadui is going to be a bit much for one command. So cool. We'll do a custom upload button for now. And once again, well, I guess for real this time, let's run the init command for Shadui. We'll do default. Of these colors, Slate's definitely the best one in Tailwind. Yeah, we'll use CSS variables for colors. Let's kill and reload the project so that it doesn't get too mad at us. Go back to localhost, and everything's going to look different and wrong, which is totally fine. We can fix that. Yep, this all looks different and wrong. It is nice that it looks like okay with the default light theme without us changing anything, but I do want to change things. The easiest way to brute force dark mode, which is what I'm going to do here. I know, I'm the guy who charged for light mode. Beam me all you want. We need to make some changes here. Oh, don't tell me they overrode. Yeah, they overrode the stuff that we did for the dialogue. So we'll fix that quick. Dialogue modal. Add that back quick. We would have seen that in Git, but I'm just going to do it here. And now everything still should open and behave as we expect. But I want to force dark mode, as I mentioned. And by far the quickest way I have found to do that when using something like Shadui is to go to your root layout and add one quick class of dark. And now everything's in dark mode. They're using the slate color. I might go swap that to be black, but for now, I think this looks great. Isn't that nice? Good stuff. So I'm going to commit that because that was a heavy thing. Git add -a, git commit -m, setup Shadui. Technically, we finished setting up the upload button, but I want to make a separate thing for Shadui FI, specifically toasts, so we don't forget. Now that we're all set up, you might have noticed the background color changed. We could fix that by going into the global CSS and adjusting some of these. You just change the background % here to 0, and now it'll be black, but honestly, I'm liking the blue. Let's leave it at the 4.9. Unlike something like Material UI, shadcn UI is really focused on giving you full control by putting all of the code in your code base. It's not like something you npm install, although it does have packages that it'll bring alongside. The core of it is much, much different. It wants to give you all the pieces to build your own design system in your code base. You'll see what I mean when we set up our toast component. So previously I had opened up the toast component in here, which honestly, wouldn't blame me if you did the same thing, but I don't want to use that. I want to use the fancy, really nice looking new one, which is Sonner. It's an opinionated toast component. So you have both in here, but I don't recommend using this guy. Sonner is much cooler. Totally didn't just waste a bunch of time accidentally setting up the toast component twice and getting really confused. So click here, click PNPM, hop back there, paste, enter, wait a second, and now we are good to go. And again, if we go back to our code base and look at the package JSON, you'll see it's installing new things like Next themes and Sonner, which is the package that does all the stuff that we want to do here. But also, if we hop into our code, you'll see that there is a new components folder. This was created by Shadui, and in here we have the Sonner TSX. Nice stuff. So let's actually set this up. There is one more step in the instructions here, which is we need to put the toaster, which is where the toast notifications will appear, inside of our code base. Specifically, we need to put that somewhere in the root, so I usually hop to layout TSX, go down to the place that we have our modal root already, paste this here instead, have to import it. And now we should be able to toast pretty easily. You'll note that we don't even need a custom hook. As long as it is a client component, this code works. So we hop in here, I'll paste that import straight from Sonner. And now I actually want to use this. So let's do such. Down here in our image upload, use uploadthing input props hook, we can pass an on begin, or on upload begin is the name of the function. And in here, we can actually do the toast. So let's toast dot, and you have a lot of options here. We can just call it directly, I believe. Yeah, we can just call it directly, but there's also things like toast.info, toast.error that will give you different states depending on what you want your toast to look like. But we just wanted to say uploading. So let's do that. Cool. And now if we hop back to the actual project, I can upload a new photo. Click here. We'll do my Adobe versus Canva original. We see we have our fancy little uploading here. How nice does that look? But it's done, but it's still there. We need to dismiss this when this is complete. And we also probably want to make sure it stays there when it's not complete. So the first thing we should do is making sure it stays there. we can do with the customization object. There's a duration. I'll give it something absurd. We'll just do like 100,000. I believe this is in milliseconds, which we can check by hovering that. I guess we can't check by hovering that. I remember from the docs, but if you don't remember, you can always go to the Shadui docs, click the API reference, wherever they put that link, or here, the docs, which brings you to Sonner, because again, this is just code that they wrote for you, built on top of Sonner. So we can go to the docs for Sonner, take a look at all the things you can pass toast, and in here, duration is one of the options. Does it actually say what it does, though? Yes, duration is a time in milliseconds. So 4,000 would be 4 seconds, 100,000 would be 100 seconds. Sounds good to me. We also want to be able to dismiss it, though, but we need an identifier to do that. So we'll let the autocomplete do its thing. We'll call the identifier for this toast upload begin. The catch would be if we have multiple named upload begin, like we did multiple uploads at once, this would break. That's not that big a deal. If we really wanted to, we could set up a system to keep track of the currently active toast and make sure the right one is being dismissed here, ideally by setting some type of identifier or doing it on a per file basis. I don't care though, just having one toast for the current uploading state and dismissing it when it's done sounds good to me. So let's first dismiss that toast once the upload is done. So we now have dismissed upload begin. Toast dot, we don't even need to do something special for this. We'll just do upload complete. Cool. And if this is all done right, we should automatically dismiss it when it's done and get a new toast of upload complete. Upload yet another file. We'll do a new affinity versus Adobe. Uploading dot dot dot. Cool to add a little animation like an SVG there for the loading state, which we can do in a minute. But we need to make sure it works first. Look at that. Upload complete and the upload is there. Isn't it cool how easy that is to set up now? Like these types of things used to be so obnoxious. Even now when I was originally like setting up the project and I used the wrong toast component, it was just so much more work. But this is how easy it could be and also how good the results can look in the browser. Like that looked phenomenal. As always, it's important to commit. So let's commit that. Add shad sonner toast component. Cool. I want that loading state though, because of who I am as a person. So the thing I like to look up for this, loading spinner SVG. And here we have a nice GitHub that I've relied on way too much, SVG spinners. It's a collection of spinners that you can use for something like this. I really like this one, like the small end circle with the big grayed out part. You can grab it as CSS, which is probably the easiest thing. Go to the code. Here we are. And here's an SVG that has everything we need for this. So there's a lot of things we could do to make this SVG. Generally speaking, you should be putting your SVGs as like assets somewhere. But if you want them to always be in your code and not have to be loaded externally, it's not a bad idea to just throw them in as code. So let's actually use this loading spinner. Const, I guess I used function everywhere else, so we'll use function here. Loading spinner SVG. Oh, shush you. Sorry about that. My cat is shouting as always. One important piece here is it has some styles in it as well. In fact, the styles are most of it. So we should take care of those. Buddy, I'm working. Guess we're getting a quick cat break. Miles says hi, and he hopes you guys can finish the tutorial soon. More importantly, that I can finish this tutorial soon, because this is taking me forever. This is my life. It's a lot of claws. Anyways, now that I'm covered in cat hair and all sniffly from it, we need to take care of all of this style. And also it looks like I didn't copy over properly, so I'm going to just delete it all. Just going to click the copy raw instead. I'm going to go drop this in the CSS file for now, because some of it's going to have to go there anyways. So let's go to our global CSS. Let's paste this at the bottom, because we just want to grab the style tag from in here and everything attached to it. So that's this guy. Yoink. Obviously, this is a CSS file, so we no longer need the style HTML tag wrapping. So get rid of all those. And then take what's left, save in order to let that auto format. Look at that. Now we have the spinner with its weird name as well as the keyframing for it. Go back here, paste what's left. Get told that class is invalid because we're in JSX. Change that to class name. And now we have a loading spinner SVG. So we need to use this. Thankfully, the toast here doesn't only take strings, it can actually take JSX. So if we do a div, put the loading spinner in it, No, it's already here. And then uploading. It's not going to be pretty, but it's going to work. It would also be nice to just see this immediately. So I'm going to be lazy and throw a use effect here that does that. This will, on every re-render, brute force this to exist so that I have it there for testing purposes. Oh boy, what's that mad about? And that is my cat again. Buddy. I thought we had come to terms to this. I have to finish filming. Can I finish filming, please? This is my life. It's the one I've chosen to live, and I'm afraid I have to kick him out. Anyways, that is done. I'm not actually seeing it when I go to the page, though. Toast. It looks like it doesn't want that there until some user action has been completed of some form. We could do things to fix that. I could add a button or something for that. Honestly, I'm going to do something real dirty just to show you guys the types of tricks I do to debug shit like this. I just want this toast to work and look good, and I want to be able to test it easily. And since we can't mount the component directly, we need some way to make it appear fast. I'm going to do something real dumb. I think you guys will understand why. Function make upload toast, just so we have the same thing for both. Return toast. Cool. And now for the stupid thing. Window.make toast equals make upload toast. Cool. That's not something the browser wants you to do or that your IDE will want you to do, but that's fine. Because now we have window.make toast that we can call and see the toast. And here we can see that the toast is absolutely screwed. So let's fix that. Class name equals flex gap 2 feels good to be the gap between those two elements. And text white will hopefully fix the loading spinner's color. Run our command again. That did not fix the color, but everything else appears to be good. Took me a second to remember, I just need to put a fill color on the SVG. And now that that's done, we go back to our console to see it actually working. Look at that. There's a little bit we can do to fix the alignment because that doesn't look quite right. So let's do that. First, we probably want to wrap this. I'm going to put it in a span. Class name equals text XL. A little bit bigger. Run our little command again. That's too big. Text large. That's a good bit better. And then we need to items center for the alignment. Look at that. Perfectly vertically aligned, reasonably sized text, nice little loading spinner. Doesn't that look great? I think that looks great. We could call the function directly, but honestly, we only needed it for this testing. We're not reusing it. So I'm just going to yoink this again and drop it back inside of here again. And now we have this all handled. I think it's fair to say that's a job well done. Let's save this and start working on the next task. Git status, git add -p, code review. Actually, we just caught something. We don't need this use effect anymore because I was just using that during debugging. So let's redo the staging. That it? Yeah. Commit -m, add styling and loading spinner for uploading state. I can push that as well. And we're done. Like, legit, at least for the UI component for this project. Obviously, there are lots of more things we could do. We could quickly change the layout of this page so things are more consistent. Lots of fun challenges for you as the creator of this. I still love this though, because we can open a modal when we do it. You get this nice full view. And if you refresh or just link straight to it, you get this dedicated view that looks significantly better now that we've fixed the top nav stuff. Yeah, this looks great. I actually built something pretty cool and useful here. But there is still a bit more I want to do in order to get this truly production ready. Let's go back to our README and see what's left. So I just made some changes to the to-do because I realized that I honestly want to do analytics first because the delete button will make much more sense with it. Make sure you stick around for the delete button stuff though, because it is really, really cool. It's some of the coolest stuff that exists in this new model. We did also just finish all of the cleaning up of the upload button though, so we can finally cross that one off. So Let's hop over to analytics. If you're not already familiar with Posthog, it is a really cool product. Go to posthog.com. TLDR, it's open source product analytics. Not just like which pages people went to, but which buttons they pressed, which user groups are doing which things. It's really useful for getting more general info about your user base and being able to identify patterns, conversions, all the things you care about when building a real product. There are other options you should definitely consider. Like if you're not really having signed in users, you just want to see what pages people go to. Plausible is phenomenal and also open source. But as they say here, they're much more a Google Analytics alternative that tells you how many people went to your pages and which pages they went to, not what actual behaviors the users engaged in, which is what you want to use Posthog for. As such, I highly recommend Posthog. I like it so much that I've used it for all the things I've built for the last 2 years, and I actually reached out to them, and I'm the first creator they've ever sponsored because I didn't want to work with any of the other companies that were interested because I don't use those. Posthog is what I use and ship. They're what I trust. They're Y Combinator alum. They're open source. They're a great option. We need to actually use it. So let's sign in. Click the dashboard or sign in button. Here we need to sign in. I'm just going to use GitHub because of course, and here we are. I'm getting all these errors because I have a weirdly configured new organization. When you make your own org, you won't have these problems. We want to create a project though. So let's do that. T3 gallery tutorial. Create project. So now you actually set it up. You can just go to Product Analytics, get started. They have their little guide here, which is honestly fine to get started, but we want to use Next. So let's click this instead. We install the Posthog.js package. They actually have a pnpm command for us there. We'll paste that. We'll grab the public Posthog key and host as well. Throw those in your environment variables. Ignore the ones I already have here. Honestly, ignore all of them because I don't want you copying my stuff. But yeah, the next public Posthog host is the actual URL, and the Posthog key is the actual like key that identifies which Posthog project. You'll notice it's public. That's intentional. This key can only be used for writing. Theoretically, somebody could use that to spam your service and clog up your analytics, but usually when they do that, it's pretty easy to identify that they're not real, especially if you use something like Clerk to identify which users are which. It means you get real data. So now that we have that done, we can hop back over here and copy the recommendations for initializing with an app router. So we copy this. This is the use client code. It's a .js file, sadly, but we can fix that. Up over. I'm just going to make a separate folder in our root, well, our app root that's named _analytics just to handle this all. And we'll put in here provider.tsx. Paste, save, mad about children React Node. Cool. It's also mad about the Posthog key. Let's put an exclamation point there for now. We could update the env.js for T3 environment, but it's not too big a deal. We'll get to that later. Now we have that marked correctly. We need to actually use it. They show how to use it here. CS Posthog provider. Go back over. Go to the layout TSX. And in here, important piece. You want this right below your Clerk provider, but above everything else because you want your Posthog provider to have access to the stuff that Clerk provides so that you can identify the users. So we paste that in there. Now that's all done. We could send a manual event too, but I'm more interested in just making sure it works. So let's save the changes. Let's run our dev environment again because I had to close it when I was testing some things off recording. I have to sign back in because I was testing things. And now we're back. Theoretically, we can just click around, go to a few different places. And now if we go back over to Posthog, see the installation complete, it knows that because it got some events from us. So it knows we had to have set this up right. We have the option to auto capture front-end interactions, which is really nice. It basically just means anytime you click a button and things like that, they'll collect some info about it. They also can capture location information, which is also pretty handy. Some people will be sensitive about that, so it makes sense to uncheck if you're one of those, but not a big deal. And then you see, once again, the free deal is insane. 1 million events a month for free, and then the price for additional events is hilariously cheap. Yeah, it's a very good deal. Let's scroll down and click skip for now. This is the page you'd invite any teammates. It's actually free to do such, unlike most services. Now we're done. It says there's no events. Sometimes it can be slow to actually show the events, like 10 to 15 minutes, but it's much faster to identify people. So if we go to the people, you'll see here's a people, and this people has information. They're in San Francisco. They're United States. That all looks pretty good to me. Useful to have this info. But now that we have this info, it'd be nice if we could actually identify who the user is and get a little bit more. So I'll show you how to do that really quick with Clerk. Remember how I said it's important to make sure the Posthog provider is underneath? This is why. I'm going to do one additional layer in here because it's the easiest place to put it. Function Posthog auth wrapper, which also takes children. We don't want any of what it put here, but it's a good enough starting point. What we want is const auth equals use auth, which should come from Clerk Next.js. Nice. And then we want a use effect. I know use effect, so scary. I'll explain why we're using it in just a second. What we want to do now is use the auth info to effectively keep track of the user's info so we can identify them. Cool. So if posthog dot identify, and here's where we can identify them via the user ID. There's a lot of additional stuff we can use here, but we'll use auth user ID to be the distinct ID. So instead of checking if auth.is signed in, we check if auth.user. Is it auth.user ID? Yeah, it's auth.user ID. And like that's a fine starting point, but I would like to have a bit more data. So I'm going to return children just to get that to go away. But we do want to identify more here. So we could get more info. Const user info equals use user. Yeah. I know this seems like a pedantic difference, use auth and use user, but user info gives you way more information. Is what we actually want here. So if user info dot user, then we want to use the stuff that we got here. So we'll drop this in. Auth.userinfo. I'm assuming ID is an option. Cool, it is. And then here we can put whatever additional info we would like. We hover over identify, you can see all the things that they allow you to pass. It can be email and then a bunch of additional info under the next part. We'll just use email for now. Email userinfo.user.email address. Cool. And we'll throw an else case here of posthog. Reset's probably the easiest thing to get rid of. Current state, we can look here. Yeah, clear super properties and generates a new random distinct ID for this instance. Useful for clearing data when a user logs out. Look at that. So smart. Honestly, what we should do for this is else if not auth is signed in, then we want to reset. So here we'd put auth and user info. And now we will identify the user when they are signed in, and we will reset posthog when they sign out. We should probably actually use this because I'm not using it here. So let's wrap this guy around children. Ta-da. And now if I refresh and navigate around a bit, and we go back over here, it should actually be able to identify me. Oh, it put all of that stuff in there because of how that works. That's actually annoying. I forgot about that. So we need to use not email addresses, but email addresses 0. Email address. Cool. We can put a bit more in here. I think it's name, I think it's full name or something like that. Yeah, full name. Once again, navigate around a bit, force it to get that new data over, the new identification, refresh this, and look at that. It fixed the email. We have the picture because it's using my gravatar. We have all of that. Isn't that nice? Really useful when you're identifying things and keeping track of the data. Looks like the page events are still taking a little bit to parse. I told you it can take up to 10 minutes, but those will all be there. You can trust that when it gets there. You'll have all this data to analyze in the future when you want to see what users are actually doing on your services. But since we've seen this worked, we know the rest is going to. Although we want to make sure this will work no matter what the user's setup is like. Specifically, we want to make sure this works even if they have an ad blocker installed, which is not as simple as it sounds. Thankfully, there have been some really nice solutions created to this over time. If we search and go to the Posthog docs, they have a little framework section. If you go to framework guides, next, and scroll to near the bottom, there's a couple things in here that are important. One is they have a guide for setting up the node side, which might not seem useful for Next, but I'll show you why it is in a little bit. So we'll be coming back here for that. The reason we're here right now is we want to use the Next.js rewrites in order to make sure we always get this info, even if the user has an ad block installed. The key to that is we need to use this async rewrites pre-built config, hop over to our next config, and add this into our core config. So in here, we're going to have rewrites, and we're going to add this new one /ingest, just paste the exact options they have there. Then we want to go back into where we have our posthog init configured, and they'll show you the code that we need to change. We need to pass a custom API host and UI host. So we're already using the API host from the environment variable. We will no longer be using that. Instead, we're going to be using these. They should have put a comma here. They forgot to. It happens. We also don't need to put a host because the host is going to be the same URL as our app. So we can just do /ingest there, and that should just work now. If we go over to here and we open up the network tab, what we should see is all of these weird E events. This E/IP equals this guy. This is going through localhost ingest, yada, yada. We can see the response to status 1. We can see the payload. It's a bunch of jumbled stuff. That is the weird format that gets sent to Posthog so that the data can't be analyzed on its way there. We have everything we need. That all works. And if we go back over here, we can see my user still exists. Nothing too weird has happened. Still no events showing up just yet, but as I mentioned, those will eventually appear. As per always, I think now's a good time to commit. Git add-a, git commit-m, basic posthog analytics. But we want to actually track things that are being done. The first thing we want to do is track when a user starts doing an upload, which is pretty easy to do. If we go back over to the upload button, I'll show you just how easy that is. Simple upload button. We can go back to the guide and I'll show you how they recommend it and we can work on it accordingly. I'm just going to go into the React examples now so I can show you how to consume it, because in the end, we are just using this the React way. Here we are, posthog.capture. Just need to use the posthog helper. You get that by using the use posthog hook. It is really simple. I didn't really need docs for that. I just wanted to show you how I would find that type of thing. So in here, similar to how we added the integration for that toast, we want to add one for use posthog. So we import the posthog React code, scroll down to on upload begin. So you can paste posthog.capture upload begin. Now, whenever an upload is begun, we'll get an event for that, which theoretically we should be able to see by hopping over here. I'm going to open up the network tab again so we can actually see these events as they go through. Network, cool. I'm going to clear so we don't have too much junk in here that we don't want. I'm going to click upload. We're going to upload the affinity, sorry again. And we see here events going through. And theoretically, some or most of these should have been the correct event. And while we'll see, we can't actually see the events yet. If we go over to data management, we'll see there is an upload begin event that was seen a few seconds ago. Again, the actual event will take a bit to appear here as they're processing all of the data, but just the fact that it appeared there means they did at some point see it. That's how you know it's working. A+. Isn't it cool? That's how they easy to set these things up. Sure, git commit, upload, event, capture. Nice. I'm going to call that one a mission success. And now for one of my favorite parts, the delete button. The reason I'm excited about this is we get to finally show off server actions a bit. So let's figure out how we want to architect this. What I have in mind is we're going to use not the modal, where do we put the full page image? This guy. Cool. So in here, I want to have a delete button, probably right underneath the created on bit. Under here, maybe we'll just do button delete. If we go back and load that somewhere, we'll see this delete button. Obviously, it doesn't do anything. We just threw that there. So how do we actually make this delete button, at the very least, look good? Well, the look good part's pretty easy with Shadui. Again, we'll go to components, button this time, and see if we scroll, there's a couple different button styles. Typically, there's a destructive style, which means that we have what we need if we install this. So let's copy the pnpm command, go back here, paste it, and now we should be able to use the capital B button from components UI button. Nice. Switch this over as well. And hopefully now that should look quite a bit better. Look at that, delete. And it also has props, which is what we want. Specifically, we want type submit. We'll want that in a second. I'll explain why. But what we want is that destructive button. I could guess how you get to it. We could also just go here and look. So let's look at the code for the destructive. Variant equals destructive, as per usual with the naming with Shadui. A variant destructive, delete. If we go back, look at that nice red delete button, how it always should have been. But obviously, clicking this still isn't going to do anything. We want it to do two things. Well, I guess three things. We want it to delete the image. We want it to send you back to the home page. We want to make sure when you're back on the home page that the content is gone. What if I told you we could do all of that with one function on the server? This is one of the coolest parts of server components. So first we need to make this a form, because if we don't make it a form, it's not going to work without JavaScript. Theoretically, we could make this a client component and do a fetch and things like that on the other side. But if we just make it a form like this, it's much easier to avoid having to do that, because now we can use actions. Form action is where server components become magical. We have to mark this as use server. The reason we're putting use server here is so that we can be sure that this functionality gets exposed as a post endpoint on whatever pages this component is mounted on. It's a bit of a mindfuck when you first discover the power of this, but when I show you here what it does, I think you'll understand. Theoretically, we could break this out somewhere else, but if we put it inline like this, we get a few magic superpowers. I know I just said that we should put everything in the server file, and you know what? I'm going to stick with that. We'll hop in queries and we'll do this right. Const users auth. We can still make sure the user's authenticated to do the thing that they're doing here, because that's important. Otherwise, I'd be able to delete things they shouldn't be able to. So we don't have the ability to do db.query for this, sadly. db.delete. This needs to take in a table. Where. Yeah, it's images from the database schema. We have where model, and we need EQ for the help. Property EQ any? That can't be right. I need to import EQ. That sounds likely, actually. Import that from there. And when you import the model with the database schema like this, you can just use that as the reference. So db.delete images where equals image ID, ID. You could also wrap this with an and, which we can import from Drizzle as well. So we'll do the and ID, EQ images, user.user ID. Now this guarantees that we can only delete images that belong to this user. Since we have that check there, we actually can delete this whole part too, because we're only going to delete the image if the ID matches and the user matches too. We were returning the image, but there's something really to return here. So instead, we're going to do something really convenient. We're going to revalidate the path of slash, because we're going to send you back home. We can also redirect you here too, to slash. Now, if I use this function in here, we can just delete the image for the current image ID. ID is number. Cool. Import that. It's mad because we're not awaiting it, so we'll do async for this. Await delete image for not. And now, this should all just work. We'll try it on this first Affinity Adobe Sorry v2.1. Loads, deletes, and it's gone. Isn't that nuts? I can even turn off client-side JavaScript and that still works. So we'll get rid of this one. It's gone. We'll get rid of this one. It's gone. The fact that it navigates that quickly without having to run JavaScript is primarily because all the work's being done on the server. Since we're handling the validation of the path and we're directing you there, it just behaves how it's supposed to. In fact, I don't even think we need the revalidate path because the path is changing. It should be smart enough to not need that. So let's see if we can get rid of this v2.1. Look at that. We can. Can I get rid of the last one too? A+. Normally, you'd want to fake this with optimistic updates and client-side validation type stuff. But you don't even need that anymore. You just write the redirect in this server function, and you're good to go. It's actually that easy. I love this for a ton of reasons, but it's honestly just mind-blowing that I can write code like this that's on the server. And this code's also on the server. And the uServer call is effectively letting me bind this function to this form on the client with no JavaScript running on the client. No JS is shipping here at all. In order to get this ID, it's actually embedding it in a mini hidden form field. So if I inspect this button here, we can look through and see that there's a form action, throw a new error. This is what it does if it's being called manually, just like giving you a fallback behavior there. The important piece within this form is that data gets embedded in order to make sure it behaves the way it's supposed to. I actually thought there would be more hidden here. I think they're moving it to other elements, but effectively what this form is doing is just embedding the data that we need. Here it is. I just refreshed and now I see it. So see all of these input type hidden things in here? These are how it's actually identifying things like the image that we put in there, because it doesn't have that info because it's just posting to this URL. It gets that info by parsing and decompiling the values that are snuck into here. It's a tiny bit of a hack, but it means that you can have one post endpoint and it will identify which function it should call accordingly. And even from this fancy /image page, if I click delete, it brings me back home with that content removed. It's so cool. It's insane that it's this simple to do this stuff. I did promise that we would analyze and like track this. First, I want to commit it though. So I didn't actually do the git add -a, commit -m, delete button, push that up. But I want to actually add analytics for this. As I mentioned before, this is something we're going to want to do with the Posthog instructions. So if we go back to the Next.js default instructions, here, next, command F for node, tells us to install the Posthog node library, npm paste for the add Posthog node. Get that in. Scroll to the app router examples. Here is where we create a Posthog client. This will run on every server invocation if we import it on the endpoint that it's being used on. I guess this should be on server. So we'll do server analytics.ts. Paste this. It's mad about the key again. That's fine. We'll use the public host for this because this is running on our server, so it can't be ad blocked. Has some aggressive flush rules because it's going to run in serverless. Totally fine. But there's a couple more things we can do here. So I'm going to rename this to server-side analytics because it's a little more accurate for what it is. Now we have everything we need to create and use the client. Generating these is free, so this is fine. Honestly, what I normally do is export const server, what do I want to call this? Analytics server client equals that. I spelled export wrong because typing's hard. Cool. Gonna get rid of the default there. I'm even gonna get rid of that. Export default, ta-da. And now we have this. And now if we want to use it like we do in here for delete image, I'll show you how we do just that. Paste, auto import, .capture, delete image. And here's where you put all our metadata. I think there's a specific metadata field. We can just check in an example in their code. Properties. Okay, this is what we want to put most of our stuff under. There's also distinct ID, which is really good for putting the user ID. So we'll do that first. Distinct ID. Oh, they don't even have the string in the front like the other things do. That makes a lot of sense. So distinct ID is the user.user ID. Makes sense. That way they can still log and keep track of stuff. Event, let's have a name. Most people do events with like underscores and shit like that. I think that's dumb. I like to actually make a string, and funny enough, they do the same thing. User signed up. I actually had an analytics provider in the past send me an email shaming me for having event names that looked like this, that were actually descriptive of what was happening. It's like, oh, your event should be named in this specific weird fancy BEM-like syntax. And I think that's stupid. Events should be human readable because humans will be reading them. I just do that. We want some properties too. Properties are really useful for a bunch of things. If we wanted to like analyze how many images were being deleted, if this was multiple, if we wanted to like keep track of what types of images were being deleted, we collected all that type of data, stuff like that. We could put that all here. For now, we'll keep it simple, just the image ID. And now we should get an event when an image is deleted. Again, trivial to test, load our page, pick some image. We'll do the center div v3.5. We'll click delete. Now it is gone. And if we go back over here, we should be able to go to data management and see a new delete image event. Ta-da! It's that easy. And now we can throw that in anything that we want to. We also, if we wanted, could wrap the analytics server client and include distinct ID automatically, so the user just passes everything else. It's a little annoying. I actually have a video where I show how I make a bunch of things type safe. I will leave the link in the description if you're curious about that. Safe libraries, Theo. Here it is. How I deal with unsafe packages. This video is me talking all about exactly what I'm describing here. So if you want to see what it looks like to set this all up, there's the video. It's one that nobody clicked, and I recommend it. How I deal with unsafe packages. Dope. Let's commit this and get done with our last step. Isn't it cool how much we've done in so little time, y'all? Feel like you're better understanding how to set up a full production-ready project? Because I'm certainly feeling like you are. Git commit analytics on delete button. Ta-da. I still love how little this affected the client. And again, that's kind of the magic. Since server actions can just be embedded inside like inline functions, it keeps you from having to like do the whole thing where you define an endpoint and then access it and then behaviors change and all of that. Instead, you're just importing a function. So if we go back to our component there, the full page image, you'll see in here like just use server, await delete images. We could have even put the content of this function in there. It would be totally fine and acceptable to do such because this function will never touch the client. It only runs on the server. And we could put multiple of these here. We could put one for each number, for each ID in here, and it all gets defined the same way any component would. It just so happens this only runs on the server. Whew, actual magic. I still get my mind blown with how simple and cool it is to do shit like this in the new model. One more thing I thought of that is probably worth calling out in order to make sure you don't accidentally use the wrong thing here. I recommend putting this as import server only, just to make sure it doesn't end up somewhere it doesn't belong. Git add, git commit, ensure analytics server only runs on server. Wow, cool. Now that's done, we can do our last step, which is rate limiting. Rate limiting is super easy to set up thanks to the first ever sponsor I had on the channel, Upstash. They have been phenomenal to work with. And if you didn't already know this, Josh Tried Code, who is another phenomenal web devy YouTuber you should check out, actually somewhat recently joined to work full-time over at Upstash. Yeah, I got a job at Upstash just a month ago. Super hyped for him. I think it's a great fit. And it's a great product. So I'll just click the sign in with GitHub button here. Now we're signed in. You see I have a ton of stuff here there because I've been using Upstash for testing shit and rate limiting random services on my personal GitHub forever. So we're going to go into Redis. Yes, they're still allowed to use Redis because it's technically not Redis under the hood. We're going to do a regional setup. I know, isn't it better to go global? Sure. But when we go regional, it's less likely to hit edge cases that would result in the rate limit not being as strict. We can name it. So we'll name this gallery rate limit create. Now we're going to Google search for Upstash rate limiter. Upstash rate limit. They have their install command. We'll npm add Upstash rate limit. And here is how easy it is to use. It's actually kind of magical. I will yoink this. We will go back to the server folder. I'll put in here rate limit.ts. Paste this, export this. We don't have the Upstash Redis package installed, so let's quickly install that. You can use the Upstash Redis package with other services because it really is just a Redis client. It's just the best Redis client. I'm going to delete all these comments because we don't need them. And now this redis.fromEnvironment command should just work. What's it mad about? Turns out this was just TypeScript being weird. Once I restarted my editor, we're fine. Yeah, you get used to it over the years. TypeScript, even when it says it's working, doesn't always work. I actually wanted to be in here. Cool. So we want to actually be able to connect to this. If we click node, hopefully it will give us the env. Cool. Just go here. Read only. That's fine. Copy. Hop back over here. Go into our .env. Paste our final environment variables of this tutorial. We'll have to move these all over to be on the Vercel stuff, but for now, this is totally fine. And if we did everything right, this is now functioning rate limiter. We have the limiter, we have all of this. Let's actually use it though. If we go back to the sample code here, we can see how they recommend using it, which is calling rate limiter.limit with an identifier. In our case, the identifier is going to be the user ID. So if we go back to our upload component, well, not even the component, we want to do this on the back end. That's the whole point. So we go to API, upload thing, core, and now inside of our middleware, once we've auth the user, we can make sure they're actually allowed to do this thing. Pretty easy to do. We import our rate limiter, and we have to give it the identifier, which is user.userid. And now, if not success, we can throw a different error. And look at that. If no success, throw a new upload thing error, rate limited. Now, if the user shouldn't be doing this, they'll be rate limited. I'm going to delete all these comments. I actually think it'll make this file a lot cleaner. Yeah, would you look at that? We get the user. If there's no user ID, we throw that they're unauthorized. We get the success status from the rate limit, and if they're not successful with that, then we throw a new upload thing error. Right now, the rate limit's pretty aggressive. It's you can do up to 10 over 10 seconds. Let's do 2 over 100 seconds for now, just so that we can confirm. Upload, affinity, uploading, upload complete, cool. Let's do it once more. We don't actually have this showing anything in the UI, but if I go to the network tab, oh, it let us do a second one. But if we do one more now, oh, look at that. We got an error from the endpoint. 500 internal server error. Ideally, we would have things set up so you get a better error on the client. We do actually have the ability to pass the error to the client already. So if we go back to our upload button, we have here an on upload error. We can capture the error via Posthog, which is really useful. Didn't even think to do that. Cool that it auto-completed and did that for us. Toast.error, upload failed. We'd also want to dismiss the upload begin here. If I did that all right, hopefully within under 100 seconds, that one will probably upload because it's been long enough that the rate limit's going to forgive us. But if I do another right after, upload failed. Look at that. How easy is it to get that working? I love that. Obviously, you probably don't want the rate limiter to be that aggressive. I'll bump this to, I don't know, 10 every 100 seconds. There's a bunch more stuff you can do with this, like the request has a ton of useful info here. You actually get things like the IP address through this. You can check the next docs to see what specifically you're passed here, or honestly, just console log it and take a look at the stuff that you get. Because of that, you can actually use things like the Vercel ID inside of the rate limit alongside a user ID. But honestly, if you have a user ID, you're probably good with just that. That's more useful if you have like an anonymous service that you want to prevent from DDoSing. But this is how easy it is to set that up. So let's commit this. Git commit-m rate limit implemented. I'm not going to push yet. There's a reason. Let's go back here. Let's go into our environment variables. And since we're using the same environment variables for dev and prod, which obviously we shouldn't, but we are, going to copy up to upload thing because that's where I think we stopped updating things on Vercel. I could be wrong. We'll figure out in a moment. Hop over to T3 gallery, settings, environment variables. Scroll down. It looks like I did get upload thing as the last one. So we actually only need to select from Sentry down. So we yoink all that, paste all that here. We hit save, and now it's done. So if I go back here and push, theoretically, everything now works, and we have a fully functioning gallery application. Let's go watch this build, because it's the most important one we've done so far. Fingers crossed, y'all. Now it is done. T3 gallery olive.vercel.app. We have all our images all loading using next image. We can go to an image, it will load the page. We can delete the image. It'll send us right back, and the image is gone. And most importantly, if we hop over to our analytics, we should now see all of the events for all of the cool new things that we're doing in production. We have all these production user identifiers, which are probably just me in all those different environments I was playing with. Specifically also the page scraping that Vercel does in order to show you that like nice little page bit. We also should have all of the events that we're getting. Again, events take a little bit to propagate, but all new ones should come through here just fine because we have done it. The server is up, and we want to make sure that those are going through. It's pretty easy to do that as well. Let's hop over to the network tab, make sure that our ad block isn't killing them. Yeah, look at that. We get all of these events, the E events for the events, and the delete's going to process on the server side anyway, so there's no way that can really be stopped. When I was wrapping up, I realized I forgot one of my favorite parts, and I wanted to make sure I included this because right now, any user can upload, which might sound great for a traditional service, but I want to make sure I can leave this public and not do such in a way where everyone can access it and upload all sorts of stuff. So I'm going to show you the best way to lock down uploads in this app. You could do this in a lot of different ways. If we go to the code and we look here at the image uploader middleware, which is an API upload thing core, you'll see that we could just lock them here. We can make sure the user ID is the right ID, or we could check the email matches a certain email that we have in a hard-coded list. But I want this to be dynamic. I want this to be a thing that we can easily go change. The best place to handle this is going to be your auth, ideally. And we can do that by embedding different data in your user's auth information. The best place to do that's obviously going to be Clerk. So I'm going to go to Clerk in my dashboard. We're going to go to users, and we're going to pick one of my two accounts. I have this one where I signed in with Gmail and this one where I signed in with GitHub. So we'll pick this one for now. This is the one where I signed in with Gmail. You can see because social accounts, Google, true. So we're going to scroll down to where it says metadata. This is one of those cool magic things that Clerk does really well for us. This lets us embed data that is public or private or unsafe. While I don't quite know what they want us to use unsafe for, I do know what they want public and private to be used for. Public would be metadata that you're okay with other people seeing. Maybe it's like your chat color. If this is a chat app, you could throw that in public and then everyone sees the hex code that your chat color is supposed to be. This still can only be updated by a server that you're running, but everyone can see it. Private metadata is stuff that only your server can see. So this is accessible on the server, but no one else can see it. Probably a good place for something like this. So we'll do just that. We're going to edit the private metadata. We're going to add a new field, can-upload, and we're going to set this to the Boolean true. Not true in quotes, just true, the value, because that's valid in JSON, which is what this is. So now we've saved this, and this is saved on my personal Gmail account. So now we can go back to our code, and we're going to add a little bit here. We have user, but this user is just coming from the JWT token that exists via Clerk. So there's no blocking, no waiting, no anything that has to be done here. But that also means they embed a very much smaller subset of the data. So we don't actually have any of the data around what metadata this user has at this point. So let's get that data. Const full user data equals await Clerk client dot users. Well, I have to import Clerk client first. .users .get user, and here's where we get the user's info via their user ID. And now we want to make sure that this user has the right permissions. So if full user data question mark docs, technically we don't know this data exists, but we do. Private metadata question mark dot, and then brackets, because can upload isn't valid JS syntax. We have to wrap it like that just so that JS knows, hey, we're getting this key from this. So if this is not equal to true, not the string true, but the Boolean true, we don't need to bracket it because it's the next line. Throw new error, upload thing error, unauthorized. I'm going to make this error different. User does not have upload permissions. So now if the user doesn't have this set to true, they won't be able to upload. I am currently signed in via my Gmail, which you can tell because I don't have any pictures here. My other account, which I did through GitHub, has a lot of pictures already uploaded. We're going to upload this random picture. Cool, it says uploading. That's a good sign. And if all goes well, this should upload and refresh the page how we would expect. Yep. And there we are. There's our new content. Now, if I switch to my other account, which I'll do quick, be right back. Now I'm back in with GitHub, which you can tell because when I click here, it has different information, and all of the content here is what I uploaded previously. If I try to upload now, I get an error. And if we go to our console, we can see what the error was. Scroll up a little here, and you see an error occurred in your middleware function. User does not have upload permissions. Ta-da! Is that easy to add auth? And now at any point, you can go to your dashboard and quickly control who does and doesn't have upload permissions by adding this field. You can even build your own UI and your own endpoints to make this easier to set up automatically. But I did this specifically so I could make sure users can't upload without my explicit permission to do such, because if they could, that would be dangerous and not good for the service. My goal is to make sure that you're deploying something that can actually go out in production safely. And if you don't have some way to make sure only certain users are allowed to upload, your service is unsafe. Combine this with the rate limit, and now you have a pretty solid guarantee that users aren't going to spam your endpoints and upload things they're not supposed to. Cool. And of course, we have to commit and push this, which makes this the final push of the tutorial. We've done it, y'all. One last thing before we wrap up. We have finished all of this stuff, but I want to pose some challenges because there's obviously a lot more to do. A challenge to the viewer. Here are some things you can do to keep working on this project to prove you've learned these concepts and push yourself a little bit. One of the easiest ones is fix the page layout for images of different resolutions. That we didn't really do much for. The aspect ratio is different, doesn't fit just right. There's a lot you can do there. It's really powerful, really cool and fun. One additional fun challenge is selecting images on the gallery page. This one's fun because you're going to need to do some state management. I'd highly recommend using a library like Zustand. That way you can set it up that when you click specific images, they get checkmarked and you have those all stored in state, and then you can do actions that affect multiple at the same time. That one's going to be more complex, but it's a really good learning experience. Speaking of which, infinite scroll would be a really good thing to add as well. So instead of having all of the content on just one page, ideally it just shows what's visible. And as you scroll, it goes and fetches more data in order to get everything you need to show the rest of the content of the page. Another fun thing along those lines is the idea of like folders or albums, which you would have to do by creating a new thing in your database. So right now our data model is hilariously simple. If we hop over to our DB schema, we just have images. But if you were to make something like albums and link images to albums, have a default album that is where things appear on the homepage, and the ability to share an album with other people as well, you can do some really cool stuff there. There's plenty of other things you can do to push the limits of this project, but I think this is a phenomenal starting point, and I'm honestly excited to see what you guys do with it. So yeah, have at it. I put a lot of time into this one. I've been recording on and off for about 6 days. I've been planning it for over a month, and I hope it shows. I certainly hope you were able to learn a lot from this. One last massive shout out to all of the sponsors of this video. They're the only reason it was possible and the only reason I could justify investing this much time into a single project. Shout out to FaZe, my editor, for taking the time to stitch this hours of content together. And thank you to yourself for watching this, getting through the whole tutorial, and making a full stack application using the modern T3 stack. I don't know what else to say other than have at it. This is my life.